What up, y'all? This is Alex Clark-Youngblood, and it is Saturday, October 3rd, 2020, and we are smack dab in the middle of a global pandemic to which there appears there is no end. Because of that, at a bit of a crossroads with this podcast. Last week, some of y'all may notice I didn't put up an episode for the first time since I began this project in March of 2020. The first 25 or so episodes of the podcast I recorded in the summer of 2018, summer, fall, and a little bit into the winter of 2018, when I was traveling around the United States, visiting family and friends just to kind of get their life stories and their perspectives on existence and in adulthood in particular. And I moved out to Los Angeles at the very end of 2019. And when Corona hit, it finally gave me the chance. I had plenty of chances prior, but there was so much free time when Corona hit. I was like, we need to get around to putting up this fucking podcast. So I did over the first 25 weeks essentially of quarantine. I put up a podcast each weekend. And I knew I was going to get to it at some point when I moved out to LA at the beginning of 2020. I was going to get around to this podcast, and my plan was to put up those initial 25 or so episodes that are recorded previously. And then I assumed, I'd move out to Los Angeles, a city of creatives, a city of artists, a massive city, a city the size of, of a country, a place I've always wanted to live. I assumed, I'd be getting into all kinds of adventures and making questionable decisions and meeting all kinds of new wacky friends. Who would be my future podcast guests. Unfortunately, the exact opposite has occurred. I've been in a quarantine pretty airtight here for, 7 months. More than that, 7 months. What are we in October now? Going on, 7 months. And I made virtually zero friends. I made a few friends in January and February, the first 2 months I was out here, and then, Corona hit, and I've been on total lockdown. If you're not or not aware, I'm working as my friend's nanny, my good friend Lucas, who has been a previous podcast guest. He has a 19-month-old daughter, and him and I had jokingly for the past few years talked about me coming out and being his nanny. And then over the years, it became less and less a joke and more of a reality, and here I am. And when I came out here, my first thought was, my hesitance was, the only way this is not going to work. It sounds perfect to me, living in Los Angeles, taking care of a small, beautiful ball of love, essentially giving me a dad internship. And then on top of that, I've always wanted to live in Southern California. And then Lucas made it worth my while financially as well. So it was just really a perfect situation. I don't like having a typical job. I don't like having a boss. I don't like being beholden to someone else's schedule. I like to be able to do my own thing throughout the day, especially determine my mornings, my schedule, my workout, yoga, meditation routine. And I love being in the sun. And I want to be a father at some point. And when I do so, I want to be able to hit the ground running. So this was the perfect dad internship for me. The only way it wasn't going to work is if I felt as if I was, trapped in a house with a baby all day long and didn't have any sort of outlet, social outlet, romantic outlet, athletic, fitness outlet. And for the first 2 months is amazing. Amazing. January, February, amazing. Love being out here. Corona hits. And for the past 7 months, the worst case scenario has happened. I've been trapped in a house with a baby all day, every day, with no social outlet, no romantic outlet, and really no athletic or fitness outlet other than, my yoga routine and workouts I put together in the backyard here. But all that being said, it's actually been totally fine. Obviously, it sucks. Like, it could be so much better, but, we're all suffering from this quarantine issue. Minus, I think, it's particularly unique circumstance for me. Everyone's circumstance is unique and particularly challenging. But for me, I've arranged my life so I can, it's constant flexibility, right? I have no interest in building a long-term romantic relationship at this point in my life. I don't have any interest in building a family at this point in my life. I want no possessions. I want as little possessions as possible. Literally, I live out, all of my earthly possessions could fit in a backpack. I don't want a lease. I don't want a mortgage. I don't want to own a car. I want absolute flexibility and freedom for me to have as many unique experiences as possible at this point in my life. And coming out here is right in line with that. There's no lease. There's no job. There's no contract. There's no pen and paper. There's no formal obligations. It's a handshake agreement between me and a friend. Corona hits and all of that flexibility is taken away. All of a sudden now I'm trapped. I don't have that flexibility to go out and go to parties or go to events and meet new people and meet random strangers, form new platonic relationships, romantic relationships. That's how I live my life. That's how I get fulfillment and satisfaction. That's what I want to do with my life right now. I want to travel. I want to move. And LA was big enough to where I felt like I didn't have to travel. I could live here for a year or two, and there's so much to explore. It'd be fine. So here we are, kind of trapped in quarantine. And as far as the podcast go, there's no new guests to meet, no new friends being made to interview. So at a bit of a crossroads here. That being said, this podcast will not stop. I cannot tell you what the future of this podcast is. I honestly don't know. As far as quarantine is concerned, I do not know. At some point here, whether it be in 6 months, whether it be in a year, 2 years, maximum I'll stay out here is until JoJo, the little girl I'm taking care of. At the maximum I would stay out here would be her into kindergarten, which would be like 3 years from now. 4 years from now? 4 years from now. 4 years from now. That would be the longest I would stay out here. At some point, I'm hitting the road again. I'm vagabonding again. And hopefully that's an option, right? I'm used to just being able to pack up a bag and cross the border down to Mexico, and then from Mexico go down to Guatemala across the border to Honduras across the border to Nicaragua, down to Costa Rica, Panama, just keep it going. That's what I love to do. And there's plenty more world to explore, especially in deep South America, Brazil, the southern cone of South America. I haven't explored it all, and that's my next plan, but who knows when that's going to be an option again. So I say all that to say, I don't know what the future of this podcast what the future of this podcast is. I truly do not know. Honestly, next week I don't know if we're going to have a guest. Are we not? Am I going to do it solo? Am I just not going to put an episode up at all? I honestly do not know. I will say this: I'm going to make every effort to put up a podcast once a week. But I want to make them meaningful, and I want to make them worthwhile, and I want to make them genuine. And I want to make them an accurate reflection of my current reality, not just a reflection of my life, but, I am the impetus for the podcast and kind of the source of it. So I do want to be an accurate reflection of my life. But of course, I want to hear all kinds of other voices of all types. And unfortunately, being trapped in quarantine makes that challenging. And the last 2 episodes I did post, my grandmother and my older sister, those were recorded in current day. I posted them the day after I recorded them. And I did them over the phone, and it's just not the same. I thought they were, perfectly fine interviews. I'm super proud of them and happy I did them, but I just don't like doing it on the phone. I like to be face-to-face. I like to feel that person's energy. The entire impetus for the 2008 podcast tour was literally so I could go visit these family and friends. Some of, especially family I really knew nothing about, and sit down with them in their homes, in their living rooms, in their backyards, in their front yards. And not only that, not only spend the day with them, but spend the night with them, spend multiple nights with them, feel what it feels like to be in their life, and then interview them about their life. So not only experience it, but then communicate about it. And that's just not a possibility right now. So it's discouraging, but the podcast will go on. The podcast will go on. And in today's episode, it is just going to be me. I think that's the truest, most accurate, genuine reflection of where I am right now in life. It's just me, dude. It's just fucking me. I hang out with my 19-month-old companion all day long, my 19-month-old best friend. She's my best friend. She's all I got. And then her parents and I, obviously we hang out as well. And that's it, man. I don't have any other friends. Obviously I have other friends. I'm not making any new friends. I'm not spending time with friends. I'll put it that way. The last 7 months have been almost complete isolation from all other human beings except the tiny child and her parents whom I live with. So I don't want to hide that fact. I don't want to shield that fact, and I want to document that fact as much as possible. I don't want the podcast to seem as if I am having these social interactions. I want to be an accurate reflection of my reality. So we're going to start today. We're going to start with this episode. And essentially what I've done with all of the past episodes, with all the previous guests, is I've essentially sat down and interviewed them about their lives. Hey, when and where were you born? And then let's go from there. And of course, we go off on tangents and conversations break off from there. So that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to start with me, just me today, interviewing myself, essentially just telling my life story. And then we'll see what happens next week, man. Maybe it'll just be me again. Maybe we'll have a guest. I do not know. But like I said, I'm going to make every effort to put up an episode every week, and then we'll just see where this thing evolves, or how this thing evolves, and what it evolves into. So here we go. My name is Alex Clark-Youngblood. Oh, my full name actually is Christopher Alexander Robert Clark Youngblood. My mom was very indecisive. Christopher, I think, is a shout out to my uncle, I believe. That was like my mom, put an integral role in raising my uncle, and I think that was just kind of an homage to him, maybe. Honestly, I don't even know the full story. Alexander, Alex, is what my mom wanted me to be called. That's my second first name. Robert, I believe, is a shout out to her dad, who I believe was dying of cancer at the time when I was born. I believe he was alive during my first year of life, but obviously I have no memory of the guy. So my mom's dad, Robert, Christopher Alexander Robert, and then Clark, my mom's last name, Youngblood, my dad's last name. My parents were, I believe, separated by the time I was born. My mom's told that story, and it's been touched on before multiple times, but my dad has never been a part of my life. Never a part of my younger sister's life, Morgan, who is my only whole sister. So anyway, I was born on February 8th, 1988 in Monroe, Louisiana, the hometown of my father. He grew up in Columbia, Louisiana, which was a small little farming community about 20 minutes south of Monroe, Louisiana. Monroe, Louisiana is in northeast Louisiana. I was born as kind of a traumatic beginning. I was a stillbirth, essentially. I was born dead, essentially. My mom tells a story. They give what's called, I believe, an APGAR score of 0 to 10. 10 being like kicking and screaming, rosy cheeks, perfectly healthy, and 0 being a stillbirth. And I was a 0. They thought I was dead. I was born completely white. And I guess I must have had brain function, or my lungs must have been working, or heart beating. Obviously some essential organs were working, I believe. But they didn't know that at the time. I appeared dead. And I was totally white except for a circle of purple around my heart. My mom always says I look like E.T., just completely pale white, but like a circle of purple where all the blood had rushed to my heart to kind of keep me alive. So they rushed me off to the neonatal ICU, the NICU. And I was there, I believe, for several days, if not a couple weeks, and eventually came to. Eventually was revived. But something kind of crazy happened when, during that time as well, they I don't know the exact details of what happened, but they plugged all of these IVs into my body, into all the major veins in my body. And when they injected, whatever the verb is for IVs, when they stuck the IV into my femoral artery, or my femoral vein, this major vein that runs in your groin, in my right groin, they severed the vein in half. They cut the vein in half, completely blocking blood flow through that corridor. And so what my body did, apparently, is it compensated by creating an alternative highway to bypass that blockage, that where that vein had been severed. And so essentially created a detour. And now all of those veins, that detour past the femoral vein, there's no blood flow through the femoral vein in my groin as there would be in a normal person. Sorry, I'm going to have to spit and pee probably during this, so I apologize for the discussing this. That detour of veins is very prominent on my abs. Anyone who's seen me without a shirt off, it's very prominent. It's kind of jarring. So it was an auspicious beginning. Almost died, and then this bizarre, second near death that my body kind of. Thank God to the body, man. I mean, modern medicine is one thing, but the true miracle is the body and its ability to heal itself. And I think it was a pretty good demonstration of that during the first few days of my life. My sister said this. My older sister Katie noted this on her interview we did a couple weeks ago. They brought me home, and she immediately dropped me on my head, like literally pulled up. I was born dead and spent my first several days or weeks or whatever the fuck it was in the NICU. They cut my vein in half. I get this detour of veins. That fortunately develops, and they didn't have to amputate my leg or die, almost die a second time. So I finally get home, I'm like, I'm ready to go. Let's just chill the fuck out. Got my new family here. And then my sister grabs me out of the car and goes to bring me in apparently the back screen door. And like, she's 8 at the time. My older sister was 8 years old when I was born. I don't know what the fuck my mom was thinking. But my sister goes to open the screen door, and to do so, to free her hands up, like starts balancing me on her thigh, like lifting her thigh up as a platform, balancing me on it, and I fucking fall off and apparently land on the crown of my head. which is a harbinger of things to come later in life. And apparently they had to bring me right back to the emergency room. Because I had this giant fucking welt in my head and I was a newborn baby. And God, I've been terrified if I was my mom. Anyway, I ended up, I guess we finally got shit settled. And I spent the first 6 months of my life in Monroe, Louisiana. I believe my mom and my dad were, I guess, trying to make shit work at the time, and eventually became, maybe they weren't even together at the time. I'm not entirely sure. Anyway, my mom's relationship with my dad was never a good one, and my dad was never involved in my life. So my mom takes me to Atlanta, Georgia, about 6 months into life. When I was 6 months old, August of 1998, my mom moves to Atlanta, Georgia, where her mom, my grandmother, was living at the time, and she just needed a change. Monroe, Louisiana is a very stagnant place, so she wanted to get out, and I'm very happy she did. I grew up in the suburbs of Atlanta, in a town called Roswell, and it was an awesome place to grow up, kind of idyllic. Certainly wasn't an idyllic childhood. I mean, I grew up I was raised by a single mom, and it was a very my mom did a phenomenal job, mind-bogglingly good job raising me and my 2 sisters entirely by herself, no child support. Well, actually, I think my older sister, different dad, I think he did contribute to her, but as far as my younger sister and I, my dad played zero role whatsoever, materially or present or anything. So she did a phenomenal job, worked full time, was involved in the community, was involved in her faith at the time, bent over backwards to make sure me and my sisters were involved in extracurricular activities, sports in my case. Incredible performance by my mom. Truly, I think she's an angelic character. Like, I think of her as like a half human, that she's half human being and then half angel, essentially, half higher being, higher mystical spiritual being of some kind. But it certainly wasn't a perfect childhood. This may sound ridiculous, but I was aware of the precariousness of my upbringing from the earliest of ages. My earliest memories, I'm talking preschool, kindergarten, I can remember thinking, this is a house of cards, this whole situation. My mom trying to raise the 3 of us on a teacher salary. My mom was a school psychologist, a psychologist that works in the school system, essentially, a teacher salary. I just always remember thinking this feels unstable. Financially, I can remember being aware of lack of finances from the earliest of ages, knowing that, like, when you go to a store, you don't ask for shit. Knowing that, when we did eat out or we got pizza, that, that was special, that was a big deal, that if my mom, was paying for us to go to a restaurant or paying for us to have food delivered or something like that was a big deal. And it wasn't something that, like, I should expect to be a regular thing, even if it was enjoyable. I can remember thinking that, from the earliest of ages. But amazing childhood in other ways. I grew up in a cul-de-sac in the suburbs, which is awesome, especially my particular cul-de-sac that I grew up on. I've run the numbers before, but there are literally over 20 kids on my little street. So you're talking like 10 houses on this cul-de-sac and 20 children, all, with plus or minus 3 years of my age. It was amazing. It was like this giant fucking orphanage got let out every day after school. And then the summers, it was just a madhouse. It was just perpetual friends, perpetual outdoor activity, perpetual fun and social interaction. When I was a child, so fucking lucky to grow up on that street and in that environment. And the schools I went to, like, Atlanta's an awesome city as far as diversity and access to different cultures and different experiences. The schools I went to were dope, man. I went to some really good public schools. My elementary school was within walking distance, half mile of my house. I would just walk home. I would just walk to it. My middle school, hop on the bus. Great middle school, great high school, and diverse fucking places. Majority white. We're in the Atlanta suburbs, but Atlanta obviously has a large African American black population and big Latino population that was just steadily growing throughout my entire childhood. Ultimately led me to, my mom saw the writing on the wall as far as the Latino population is concerned, and I'll get to in a second. I've mentioned it before in the podcast, but one of the few times my mom has really intervened in my life and told me adamantly I must do something was taking Spanish in college. Like, well, she introduced me, she enrolled me in those classes from what I remember in like middle school and high school as well, just kind of putting that on my radar. Hey, you might want to take some Spanish. And then I was done with that shit when I got to college. But it was one of the few times when I went off to college where I was like, no, you're minoring in Spanish. So very diverse upbringing. Feel very fortunate to have went to the schools I went to and have been exposed to the wide variety of human beings I was exposed to in Atlanta. I was a very successful kid, in all ways. Like, I'm talking about elementary school kid. School came very easy to me. I was in what was called TAG, Talented and Gifted Program for academics. I remember school just being easy. Kind of like a waste of time was my feeling. I love going to school and hanging out with friends, but I remember thinking, like, God damn, why do I have to be here 8 hours a day or whatever it was? I feel like we could get all this shit done a lot quicker, which I still feel, especially having worked in this as a teacher. But very successful academically, very successful athletically. Was on all the traveling sports teams and had plenty of academic and athletic success. And socially, I've never had trouble making friends or soliciting interest from the opposite sex or anything like that. I was on a nice trajectory there in elementary school. But right around the end of elementary school, really right around puberty, I'm not sure the exact day. I believe it really started in earnest in 5th grade. And the one thing I remember being kind of like the catalyst for shit hitting the fan was I would walk home, as I said, every day from elementary school. And I can remember in 5th grade, all of a sudden this kind of voice starting to develop in my head. Kind of the separate evil voice telling me I had to do certain things or there would be horrible outcomes. And some of the first things I can remember, actually one of the first things I remember as a huge Minnesota Vikings football fan growing up. My basketball coach at the time and camp counselor played a very influential role in my life in late elementary school and through middle school as a father figure. And he was from Minnesota. And so on the weekends, he used to take me out on Sundays to go watch the Vikings. And I became a huge Vikings fan. First season, 4th grade, 1997, week 1, Vikings-Bills. I became obsessed. I loved sports prior to that, but that really solidified my love for professional sports. So I was a huge Vikings fan, and I can remember the Vikings were playing, I believe it was the 49ers in the 1990... I want to say it's the 97-98 season. I may be off here. But one of the first things I remember was watching I believe it was a Vikings-49ers playoff game, and this voice in my head telling me, you must sit in this spot this entire game and not move. If you move, the Vikings will lose. And I moved, and the Vikings lost. And I remember thinking, like, holy fuck, I just caused the Vikings to lose. I think I was maybe 9 or 10 at the time. And then it started to really kind of get out of control. From there, it was, you must walk home from school in this path in the exact same way, stepping on the exact same sticks, on the exact same cracks, in the exact same holes, in the exact same way every day. If you don't walk home this way, your mom will die in a car accident on her way home from work. I remember that, like, took over my head all of 5th grade. This notion that, like, I must execute these compulsions, these routines in this way, or my mom is dead. And then 5th grade and the 6th, 7th, 8th grade, it just developed from there. And what we're talking about here is obsessive compulsive disorder. And it went from walking home in a certain way, or from, sitting a certain way while watching the Vikings game to walking home in a certain way. And then from there, it just took over every aspect of my life. The compulsions I ended up having to complete essentially for the next decade. So this started maybe when I was 10 years old, and it went on in earnest, like very strongly through college. And quite frankly, I'm a 32-year-old man now, and it's still not totally done. And I'll get into more specifics, but it took over my life, especially elementary, middle, and high school. It took over my life in every aspect. So, like, everything I would do. It wasn't just walking home. It wasn't just watching sporting events. It was everything. Washing all the typical shit that you hear about from OCD cases. Washing your hands 100 times, checking all the locks, checking the stove, all that shit. But, dude, I'm talking everything. I remember being in high school and not being able to dress myself, because I would have to go through this intricate hour-long routine in order to put on my own clothes as like a 16-year-old. everything. It took over every part of my life. I had to execute all of these compulsions essentially every second of every day, or something terrible would happen. And it, like I said, it would change. The compulsion and the resultant consequence, if I didn't complete the compulsion, would change. You know, it would be, I don't know, when you're fucking putting on your shoes, you need to identify like a dark spot on the shoe and swallow saliva X number of times. And if you don't do that, then like none of your friends at school will think you're funny anymore. Whatever. There are thousands of different combinations of compulsions and potential consequences for not completing those compulsions throughout, basically starting 4th, 5th grade onward, essentially until this day. I kind of got a hold of it as I entered adulthood. Kind of got a hold of it maybe middle of college. But then even post-college, the traditional OCD stuff, like washing your hands, like compulsion and resultant consequence, wasn't necessarily the manifestation of the illness post-college, but certainly like remnants of it, and I'll get into it more specifically here in a minute. But I say all that to say that my life was turned upside down starting in elementary school, and it really, it was bad, man. It was really, really bad. All of a sudden, like I said, I was a super successful student in all of the gifted programs and honors classes, and I stayed in those programs throughout my kindergarten through 12th grade education. I was still in honors classes, and I was still in the AP classes in high school, but I was just getting by. Just getting by. Once again, this may sound ridiculous, but it's the truth. I didn't read a book, like cover to cover. I completed this book in, a month or whatever. Standard reading a fucking book. Catcher in the Rye, Scarlet Letter, Great Gatsby, all the standard fucking high school books, Fahrenheit 451. I didn't read any of that shit. I didn't read a book cover to cover until my freshman year of college. My freshman English class was the first time I read a book. I couldn't. You would read a sentence, and after read a sentence, literally 317 times, whatever the number of the day was. Just opening the book. So, I'd have to inspect the cover, the back cover, the spine, all the pages, if there's any, bent pages. I can't, I can't even, there's not enough words in the English language or time in this podcast for me to explain kind of the ridiculous intricacies of the OCD, but suffice it to say that I couldn't read because of compulsions. I could not read. I could not read. I could not write. I could not do my homework. My mom tells a story of when she first realized that something was really wrong, and I never let on to anyone until college about this. My mom would notice things, my friends would notice things, but no one had any idea the extent to which it was affecting my life until my first time I really kind of admitted it, but that wasn't until college. But my mom tells a story about the first time she noticed something was seriously wrong, and she, this was just the iceberg, she didn't see nearly the majority of what was going on below the surface, was, I think, 7th grade, and I was sitting down doing algebra homework. And she just hears grunts of frustration and maybe pounding of the table as I'm sitting doing my algebra homework at our dining room table. And she comes over, she's like, "Everything all right? What's going on over here? You having trouble with the problem? You don't know how to do the problem?" And I was like, "No, I can't write it." And she looks down at my paper, and I have the number 1 for the first problem in the algebra homework just written all the way down the left side of the paper, all the way down the middle of the paper, all the way down the right side of the paper, and just scribbled out 1, scribble, number 1, scribble, number 1, scribble, number 1, scribble, number 1. And that was very common for me. I would, time to do problem number 1. Okay, write problem number 1, and for whatever reason, I write the number 1, it doesn't work. So it's okay, I got to fill up this entire paper, front and back, with number 1s before I can start on problem number 1. And that type of shit would happen all day, every day. All day, every day. And so she was like, immediately, she's a school psychologist. She's seen shit like this before, so she knew it was up. She's like, "How about you just let me write it and you just dictate it to me?" And I did all of the math in my head right there. Boom, 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 boom. Explained it to her orally. Problem solved. And she says, she wrote a note to the teacher on my homework, "Hey, Alex was having some problem essentially transcribing." So I wrote it for him, but he knows how to do the shit. And that was very emblematic, man, of every single fucking day of school for a decade, man, from 5th grade through 15th grade, really. And it got bad. It got really bad. I would say towards the end of middle school, from really all through high school, I say suicidal, but I wasn't suicidal, man. It wasn't like I had razor marks on my wrist, or had suicidal attempts where someone had found me OD'd on pills or some shit. But it was constant suicidal ideation. It was constant acknowledgement that I don't want to live this way. I would rather non-existence than this obsessive compulsive existence. It just wasn't a joy. It just wasn't. Talk about not being. I mean, not even a joy. So opposite of joy. Like, it was a grind every single day. Every single day was a war. And even in your sleep, man, you can't. The sleep is not a respite, because in your dreams you're still completing the compulsions. In your dreams, it's just you're stuck with the compulsions. It's not like you. It's still the same brain. So you fall asleep and you're just, doing fucking OCD compulsions and, washing your hands 300 times in your fucking sleep. And then you wake up and immediately it's like, okay, what fucking OCD song and dance do I have to do today, just to get my teeth brushed? And then as soon as your teeth are brushed, you got to put on your shoes and there's a whole dance there. It's all day, every day, man. So it was on my mind all through my childhood, or really adolescence. Man, I should just kill myself, Not even like, I wasn't depressed, I liked myself. I thought I was a capable kid. I knew I was smart. I knew I was athletic. I knew I was sociable. I knew I had like characteristics that were, desirable. I feel like I had the tools to be a happy and successful kid at the time and future adult. And the OCD was just preventing me from, certainly from fulfilling my potential, but really even just having like the mental space to just breathe and exist and kind of even take an evaluation of what was going on around me. And the next thing I know, it's time to go to fucking college. So obviously I'm very happy I never attempted to take my life, or I never took my life, and I never even attempted to take my life. I never tied the noose around like the fucking rafters of my attic or whatever. I don't know what the fuck, where you hang yourself. But I would definitely ideate at night before falling asleep. I would come up with a plan, just like a tentative plan, almost as like a sense of relief, almost as like an anecdote to help me fall asleep. Like, this notion of dying, of no longer having to deal with this shit, was kind of comforting and relieving and helped me relax at night. And so at night before I'd fall asleep, I would, kind of devise these ways of how I would kill myself. Like, how do I do this? With a knife? Do I slit my throat? Just kind of just analyzing the tools I had at my disposal at my mom's house. Hanging, like, god damn, that sounds fucking horrible, but sort of slitting your throat. Where do I get a gun? Where do you get a gun? Like, where? I don't even know where to get a gun. I would come up with these kind of plans of, if I can't solve this OCD problem this week, on Sunday I might have to, end this all. And that was kind of the thing too, dude. It was like I would constantly convince myself, and I believed it, like, okay, if I can just wash my hands 700 times today, this will be the last time I do this. I just need to get over this. And I would fall asleep like that all the time. It's like, okay, when I wake up in the morning, I know I have to go to the dryer and like take the clothes in and out of the dryer and run the dryer in some complex algorithm of fucking taking the clothes in and out. But as soon as I do that compulsion, I'm done. I just need to get that one done and I'm done. But of course, as soon as you close the dryer, you step through the threshold of the laundry room into the basement, and then you gotta, something went wrong stepping over that, through the doorway. So now you gotta, go back through the door. It just doesn't stop. Your brain is very sick. Nothing really changed with that until college. Like I said, all of a sudden it was time to go to college. It was like my life, I feel like my adolescence, childhood just kind of zoomed by. Like these, what would we say, 5th grade through 12th grade? So what is that? 7 years? Just 8 years kind of just zoomed by, and all of a sudden it was time to go to college. It's like, okay, well, fuck, I guess I take the SAT, and it was always just kind of a given that I was going to go to college. And I was like, oh, fuck, but to go to college, you got to take the SAT or the ACT. Fuck! Because I can't read. I mean, I can physically read. I know the words, but like, there's going to be these passages. I'm going to have to reread them over and over again and do like swallow saliva on every period and every dotted I. And then the bubbles, the scantrons and the bubbles, I had to have a routine for every bubble. Every bubble would take me a minute. And so when I took the SAT and ACT, I didn't finish a single section. Couldn't finish a single section on those things. I ended up getting a respectable score. I think out of 1600, I got like a 1240 or something. So, like a good score, like a solid score. 1240 out of 1600, like pretty good score. Not like the standard I had for myself, and it was below the standards of like all of my classmates in these AP classes were hitting. And it was below the standard, quite frankly, for like the number one school we all wanted to go to as suburban, or any kid in Georgia, was to get into the University of Georgia. The University of Georgia at that point had become a pretty fucking competitive place to get into. You essentially needed a 4.0 or close to it in high school. And on top of that, you kind of needed a minimum 1,300 to get in. And the reason for that is Georgia, if you're able to meet, I think it's an A average, or what it was at the time when I was in high school. If you have an A average in high school, you go to any public college in Georgia for free. And UGA and Georgia Tech are the two best ones. And so if you were able to get into those schools, you're going for free. Like the standard to get into those schools is high enough that like you're automatically getting what's called the Hope Scholarship, the scholarship that's funded through the Georgia State Lottery. A average, you go to any public school for free. I didn't have the 1240. I had an A average. I don't know, shockingly, I don't know how the fuck I got an A average in high school. I would just, like I said, I couldn't read anything. I would do the homework as best I can. I would get the tests done as best I could, but like I couldn't study the material, right? I could try to take the book home and read it, but 3 hours in, I've read a paragraph. So I would just show up and listen and just kind of absorb the information around me, and just kind of, especially with like English and shit like that, just kind of write and espouse kind of themes, like broad themes, and that would get the job done, get me the A. But that 1240 on SAT was not good enough to get me into UGA. And when I did not get into UGA, that to me was this major watershed moment. Like I said, all of a sudden, like my adolescence had zoomed by. I'd been so caught up in OCD, I didn't really even see my childhood going by. And all of a sudden it was time to not be a child anymore and go off to college. And I couldn't even get into the state school, that all my friends were going to. And so, fortunately, the University of South Carolina had given me an academic scholarship to go there. So I had another option. I could have gone to other smaller state schools, Georgia State, Georgia Southern, but fortunately, the University of South Carolina had given me money to go there. So I chose to go there. And that summer after high school graduation and before University of South Carolina, man, I just went. It was like OCD boot camp. I just told myself, like, dude, this shit is unfucking acceptable. Like, you're not a kid anymore. This is not, essentially for 8 fucking years, you've been telling yourself, this is the last time I tie my shoes like this. This is the last time I wash my hands like this. This is the last time I, have to go through some fucking OCD song and dance in order to get myself dressed. And you've been doing that and operating that way for 8 years, and all of a sudden now you're not in elementary school, you're about to go to college. And so that summer before I went off to college, I just went through this. Cognitive behavioral therapy is an approach used in psychology a lot, right? It's just kind of reframing of your perspective of all of your decisions and all of your thinking. And so I still was super embarrassed by this. And once again, my friends and family had noticed something was wrong and knew something was wrong. And at some point in middle school, my mom intervened and like kind of forced me to go to a psychologist. And when she did, I denied to the psychologist that anything was wrong, that what my mom was seeing was, kind of just like blips on the radar, just kind of hiccups, that didn't need to be, addressed like this. I was fine. And actually the first time or two she drove me to the psychologist's office, as soon as she pulled in the parking lot, I jumped out of the car and ran away. This is like 7th grade. And I would just deny that there was an actual big problem just because I was ashamed of it. I knew I was supposed to be, successful academically, successful athletically, successfully, socially. I knew that's what I was capable of. And so I was really ashamed I knew there was something deeply wrong with my brain. And I really thought I could just, like I said, do this compulsion one last time and I'd be fine tomorrow. And, your entire adolescence goes by with that kind of eating you alive. So, during the summer before college, I went through this kind of OCD boot camp where I just kind of I was working that summer as well at a deli by my house. And other than that, it was just working, I think I was going to the gym at the time, going to the gym when I first started lifting weights, and working on my OCD, working on putting on my shoes in a timely manner, working on reading complete sentences without having to start over, working on getting dressed. Literally, I'm talking about 18 fucking years old, about to go off to college with an academic scholarship. I'm working on getting dressed. No fucking joke. Working on reading a sentence. Just telling myself, just read the fucking sentence and don't do it again. put on the shoes and don't take them off when we like. And that was a struggle. I was highly unsuccessful at this. But as the summer went on, it was just like I focused all of my time and energy outside of my $7 an hour job and outside of going to the gym on trying to address these issues, trying to just be conscious of the ridiculousness of this behavior. And I honestly think I reduced my symptoms by like 70, maybe like 50, 70% by the time I got on campus my freshman year. And actually the day before I went off to college, I was helping three of my best friends move into college, 2 to Georgia Tech and 1 to Georgia, actually 2 to Georgia Tech, 2 to Georgia State. 4 of my best friends moved into college. And the dude who I was absolutely closest with, Hunter Brinkman, who's been a guest on this podcast episode before, or on this podcast before, and he talked about this. I remember like we got him moving into his dorm, and we're in downtown Atlanta where both Georgia Tech and Georgia State campuses are. They're right next to each other. And so like we left his dorm and walked like all the way across Georgia Tech's campus to Georgia State's campus. And this is like one of the most profound moments of my life, dude. I was like, a gay kid coming out of the closet. Like during that walk across campus, it was this watershed moment for me. He's going out. This is my best friend. It's a whole different story. We were supposed to go off to college together, and then to LSU, and then we didn't. That was kind of a traumatic thing too. And we talked about it during Hunter's episode. But anyway, we're walking across campus, and I knew, like, I'm going to come out to this guy, not about my sexuality, but about my mental health. And this Hunter was my closest friend of all. We spent so much fucking time together. So, of course, he saw certain things, and he knew something was kind of wrong, but didn't realize it was a major issue. Kind of just thought these were kind of quirks and habits that I would do, checking the locks on my door. It would take me a long time to get my cleats on for sports, shin guards on for soccer, shit like that. And he would notice those things, obviously, but he didn't know anything was horribly wrong. So this is the first time as we walk across campus that I kind of came out to him like, dude, I have been, our entire friendship, this has been eating me alive. And it's really, I feel like it's kind of destroyed my life. I feel like I'm kind of coming out here on the other end, like battered and bruised, and I'm glad I am just battered and bruised, and I am still here, but I feel really fucking battered and bruised as I'm about to go off here to college. Like, I'm about to go off to college and be an adult, and I don't even have confidence that I can read a paragraph successfully. It was the first time I ever admitted to someone that I have a major fucking mental illness, and I don't know really what to do about it. I never said anything like that to my mom, to my sisters, family, friends, nothing. Hunter was the first time I came out to that, but that was a very helpful thing. It was very cathartic for me to admit it and to like just put it on the open, and it allowed me to more thoroughly address it. And the next day or 2 days later, or whatever, I packed up my fucking Jeep Cherokee and drove up to Columbia, South Carolina, and began adulthood essentially. And it was a fucking grind. But fortunately, I knew no one at South Carolina. I did not want to be there. As soon as I got there, I did not want to be there because it was like this consolation prize for OCD to go to South Carolina, right? It was like, I wasn't supposed to be there. I was supposed to have better options than the University of South Carolina. Nothing against it, I was a fortunate kid that I did have the potential for a better option. That potential was never realized because of OCD. But I remember as soon as I got to South Carolina, I was like, this is the OCD. This is where OCD brought me, I never wanted to be there, which was a kind of a blessing in hindsight because it allowed me to focus all of my time and energy on schoolwork. And it wasn't as if I needed all of that time to be successful at schoolwork in theory, but I did need that much time because it was the first time really like I was engaging with my schoolwork in a very thorough way. OCD was still playing a major role, but it was like, okay, I don't play sports anymore. I don't have any friends. I have an hourly job as I always have, as long as I've legally been able to work. At 12, actually, I started working. I've always had a job. So I had a job like working at like the front desk of the gym, and then I had class. And that was it. And so it would take me forever to read still, but I was doing it. I was reading a full chapter. I read my first whole book. It took me fucking ever because there were still OCD things I had to kind of navigate, but it was getting better. And I was actually doing it. I was writing full essays. I was doing Scantron multiple choice bubble test, and I was getting it done before the end of class. And all of a sudden, after a few months, I'm getting it done before everybody in class. And all of a sudden, I'm on these 101 classes, like psychology 101, sociology 101, these kind of like liberal arts 101 classes, I'm getting like fucking hundreds on every, like I'm not missing a question on any of these tests. I'm like, okay, here we go. It's happening. And it did. I was super successful that first year of school and got straight A's, and that allowed me to transfer out of South Carolina and go to the school where I probably should have gone from the jump, was University of Georgia. Transferred back to UGA, had a bunch of friends there, started partying, started actually being a college student my sophomore year. And I think in large part because of that, because of alcohol consumption, heavy alcohol consumption for the first time, that shit started to come back. The OCD started to come back. And my first semester sophomore year, so not soon after I had gotten there, I was reading a philosophy book in my apartment, and I noticed I'm rereading the same sentence over and over. I can't get past the dots on the I's, the periods. It took me like an hour to read a page, and I was just like, fuck this. And I called up my mom, and for the first time ever, I admitted to my mom that like I suffer from a major fucking mental illness and I need help. I wasn't gonna like revert back to the old days. And so she's a psychologist, has psychologist connections. She got me in with psychiatrist friends of hers, and the psychiatrist put me on Adderall, which was a bad idea, not what you use to treat OCD, and Prozac, and antidepressant. Once again, I wasn't depressed. I wasn't like, I didn't like see like hopelessness to existence, or, it wasn't like a cloud following me around every day. I wasn't it at all. I liked who I was, and I liked the potential and hopefulness of life, and I liked being alive, and I still kind of had this optimism every day. I was going to wake up and OCD wasn't going to be a problem, but it always was every single day. So, psychiatry in particular, treating mental illnesses is a little bit of a crapshoot. It's a very inexact science, right? We can't see these injuries in the brain like we can in other organs of the body. In psychiatry especially, man, I've had a pretty extensive history with psychiatry now. It's really fucking throwing darts at a dartboard. It's like, oh, maybe this pill will, alleviate some of your symptoms, but best case scenario, it's going to alleviate your symptoms and have side effects. Worst case scenario, or just like pretty typical scenarios, it exacerbates your symptoms or causes entirely different symptoms. Psychiatry, man, is a mess. I really think it should be reserved for like, suicidal patients, extremely violent. Like if you are a imminent danger to yourself or others, psychiatry, I think, should be involved. Otherwise, I really think people should make every effort. If you're not thinking about not thinking about hurting yourself or hurting someone else, try to resolve that shit in some other way. I wish I had, but I didn't, and was put on Prozac and put on Adderall. And don't get me wrong, dude, the Adderall was badass. The Adderall is fucking great. Like if you're a student or you need to get monotonous shit done, reading, writing shit, computation shit, Adderall is the shit, man. That stuff is great. It's brain steroids, but it's highly addictive. It drastically affects your personality. It made me super irritable. It destroys your ability to, your sleep patterns. It's an amphetamine, dog. It's meth. It's like really, I've never smoked crystal meth, but I've done cocaine numerous times, and it's a very fucking similar feeling to cocaine. It feels like super, like finely tuned, highly filtered cocaine. I'm assuming crystal meth is a very similar experience, right? That's what it is. It's a drug. It's a really clean, powerful stimulant. It's a drug, dog. It helps. Don't get me wrong. If you need to get some shit written, you need to take a test. It helps. It certainly does. If you have trouble staying focused, it fucking helps. But it is not without side effects. Very dangerous, potentially detrimental side effects. But I stayed on that shit all through college, and it was a big help. Sophomore year through senior year at least. And the Prozac was a big help too, man. The way I described the function of the Prozac, don't get me wrong, I know I just kind of shat on psychiatry, but the Prozac was a big help. I don't think it was necessary to solve my problems. As a matter of fact, I know it wasn't. I demonstrated prior to that, totally on my own without any psychological intervention, that I was capable of solving the problems just through concerted effort and focused energy. And that was as an 18-year-old. if I had a fully formed brain and life experience, I think I could have developed an even better plan on my own. Obviously working with a mental health professional would be more efficient, more effective, but, I took Prozac. I'll get to it, but I literally, as I speak today, October 3rd, 2020, I'm still on Prozac. I've tried to get off various times throughout my adult life, and I'll tell that story here in a second. Anyway, they put me on, the psychiatrist put me on Prozac, and this is the way I described the effect of Prozac was, when I was in the throes of OCD for, over a decade, and still, like I said, still kind of in the remnants of it today, and who knows if I probably always will be, hopefully not, but probably always experience some symptoms of it. OCD was like this. I describe it like this. It's like my brain was a castle. And when OCD was raging, which is, every second of every day for over 10 years, it was like my castle, my brain was constantly being bombarded by invaders, barbarians, hurling fucking flaming balls into the castle, tearing down the castle's walls, flaming arrows, trying to, breach my castle and take over constantly. It's what it was like. My brain was a castle that was constantly under attack from invaders. And all of a sudden, when I took Prozac for the first time, and it took a few weeks, maybe a couple months for it to kick in, it was like, whoop. My castle was still there. There were still invaders trying to get in. Like, I could feel the invaders still trying to get in, but all of a sudden I had erected like this massive fortified wall with a moat and a fucking dragon. And so the invaders were still on the periphery of the castle walls, but they stood no chance of actually breaching the gate. That's what it felt like. It was like, okay, I can kind of feel the OCD symptoms, those compulsions. I can feel them on the sidelines, peering in and wanting to get after me. But the Prozac was like, it helped me build this really strong wall around my castle that couldn't be breached, or, not regularly or not particularly effectively. So that was a huge, huge help. I ended up being, college was a fucking breeze, man. I loved college. Academically, I loved college. For the first time in my life, I was reading books. I was writing papers. It was, I could just access the material. It was like, I don't have to go through this perpetual, infuriating, suicide ideation-inducing song and dance to read. I can just read. I loved it, and I ended up studying international affairs, and my mom convinced me to minor in Spanish. I hated the Spanish classes, actually, or didn't enjoy them very much. But I ended up studying international affairs, and I loved those classes for the first, throughout my childhood, all of my time and energy and focus was absorbed and just getting through the day, battling OCD and getting through the end of the day, and then waking up and repeating. I was very into sports, so I think any outside energy I devoted to kind of following sports, all the major sports, professional baseball, basketball, football. But that was also kind of an outlet, right? It was an escape from the OCD. And I was playing plenty of sports at the time too, also an escape and outlet, but playing the sports actually kind of created this cyclical effect, contributed to the, because it's nerve-wracking to play sports at a high level. Or it can be, especially when fuck, I don't even know if I'm gonna be able to get my cleats on time in order for the game to fucking start. So actually playing sports, while it was an outlet, also contributed to my anxiety and exacerbated the OCD as well. But anyway, college was the first time I was like, oh shit, I just have to fucking do schoolwork and then go work at the library for a few hours a day, and that's fucking it. This is fucking cake. So I started doing all kinds of different shit for the first time. I started becoming aware of the world, aware of politics, and I was studying international affairs. So started becoming aware of global inequities and crazy shit that's going on around the planet. Starting to learn about economics, macroeconomics in particular. And that shit fascinated me, especially global poverty and development. And I don't know, I was enthralled by it all. And I had all this extra energy and time and energy because it wasn't being wasted on OCD. So, I got into the Model United Nations Club, which was kind of surprising to all my friends. The Model United Nations at UGA is kind of like a very nerdy, politic-y type of deal, and that really, certainly wasn't the dude I was growing up. I was kind of like the jockey class clown guy. But a lot of that, there's kind of this nerdy intellectual side to me as well, certainly, but I never, developed that or certainly never expressed it because of the OCD. But all of a sudden, now I could. So, all right, try out for Model United Nations teams. I've never done something like that before. Made the Model United Nations team. Now I'm involved in like extracurricular intellectual pursuits. Like, what the fuck is this? Okay, this is cool. But then I still had extra energy, and I was getting really into working out. And then I started becoming really regretful. I was like, holy shit, like I could have been doing this my entire academic career, like performing at a high level and doing extra shit academically. What about athletically and physically? I was, getting bigger and stronger and sculpting my body in the gym. And I always considered myself a good athlete. And I thought I could have had opportunities to play sports in college if it wasn't for OCD, right? I couldn't even fucking tie my cleats. You tie your cleats and you did it wrong, and you step onto the field, and the entire fucking time you're just thinking about, oh my God, I gotta tie my cleats, but all of a sudden the ball's coming to you, there's just no way I could have performed at my highest level athletically. So then all of a sudden I was like, okay, let's get that going again. So I started looking into playing college football. At the time I was at University of Georgia, so I met with their coaches, and they're just like, are you fucking kidding me? This is the University of Georgia football. This is essentially professional football. Who the fuck are you? You haven't played football since sophomore year of high school. I don't remember the last time I played football before that. Anyway, what are you fucking thinking? And their base was like, no, you can't just walk on. We have a long list of high level athletes with, game film and high school stats that are trying to walk onto this team. We don't have any fucking room for your ass. And the economy had just tanked at the time. This is '08, '09, and they're like, we also have our athletic budget just got cut, so we're only taking preferred walk-ons, not just letting people come off the street and using resources on them. So I was like, all right, fuck it, I'll find some other place to go. And so I ended up transferring to Louisiana Monroe. I was born in Monroe, Louisiana, and the college my mom went to was University of Louisiana Monroe. And actually, there's some further backstory to that. What are we? Oh, not even an hour into this thing. Okay, we're not even an hour into it. Yeah, 56 minutes. Yeah, so I'll tell the kind of the backstory to how exactly I ended up at Louisiana Monroe. So my sophomore year of college, man, like I said, I started partying real hard at UGA. UGA is the shit when it comes to partying. Obviously, you've got the football, right? But Athens, Georgia, the town where UGA is the coolest fucking place on planet Earth, man. It has more I forget what the exact stat is, but I think it's more bars per square mile than any place in the United States, maybe the world. It's just bar on top of bar on top of bar. It's so fucking fun, dude. It's this quintessential college town. It's nothing but college kids and townies, and dude, it's just a fucking college kid's paradise. Shit, I mean, even 32-year-old man, I'm not the typical 32-year-old man, but it's kind of my paradise now, although I don't really drink anymore. But I certainly did at the time. But the only bad thing is the cops in Athens, both Athens PD and then University of Georgia PD, they don't fuck around with kids drinking. Arresting kids for underage drinking is how they pay the bills around there, those fucks. So my sophomore year, there was this chick in my math class who I was really into, and I invited her over to a party at my friend's apartment. I'm talking. I took my studies very seriously, so I didn't party that much during the week. I would go out on Thursdays every now and then, but for the most part, I did not miss class, and I did not party during the week for the most part. But Fridays and Saturdays, I was getting after it every Friday and Saturday. We just keep a keg in the kitchen in college, man. It was on whenever you wanted to be on. Anyway, so I invite this girl over to our friend's apartment, just a little party we're having, beer pong, pregame, then go out to the bars. Actually, I think this night actually was a Thursday night. Anyway, she comes over, gets banged up, real drunk. And she's playing beer pong with me, and I think it turned out she had a gluten allergy. She shouldn't have been drinking beer, but I guess all we had was beer or something. I don't know. Something went wrong. Maybe she just got too fucked up. I don't think her and I ever had a chance to really debrief about exactly what happened. Anyway, she gets bombed, whether it was allergic reaction or just, high-level alcohol intake. We start, we pregame, play beer pong, for a couple hours, then head down to the bars. And as we're walking from the apartment to the bars, I started noticing, this chick's having trouble walking. So we get to the first bar, pulling out our IDs. All of us have fake IDs at the time. She was young. I think she was a freshman. I was a sophomore. So this chick's like 18, 19 years old. I'm 19, 20. I think I was 20. And we get to the bar, and the bouncer's like, nah, man. There's no way I'm letting this girl into this bar. She's out of it. It's like, all right, well, I guess I'll take her home. And we all live right off campus. I had no idea where this girl lived, actually. So I was like, all right, I'll just take this chick back to my place. I promise you, the story sounds a little sketchy, and I can kind of see how it went wrong from an outsider's perspective. But I promise you, I remember thinking about considering all of these factors. I'm a crazy dude. I've made questionable decisions throughout my life, but I have standards. I don't die drunk. I don't fuck around with girls when they're too fucked up. Don't get me wrong. I've had plenty of drunk sex, but, highly consensual. Both of us fucked up sex. But, I was intoxicated at the time. I had a buzz going, but I certainly wasn't drunk. Drunk. Certainly not anywhere close to her level. And I recognized that for what it was. My plan was walk this girl back. I did not know where she lived. Walk this girl back to my apartment, which was right off of campus, right near downtown. Put her in my bed. I'll sleep on the couch. We'll wake up in the morning. She can wake up in a bed by herself. I'll be on the couch, so there won't be any fucking questions. So we get about halfway to my house, but I knew I was in trouble. And this is pre-Uber, right? I was a poor college kid. I didn't have any money. I didn't ever take taxis. Not to mention I love walking, especially I love walking intoxicated. I was walking and reflecting intoxicated. In hindsight, I should just put this girl in a cab, hopped in a cab, take her back to my place. So I was like, no, we can make it. We can walk it off. And she can move her feet. So anyway, I'm rambling with this story. We start walking. I didn't want to take any, this sounds so sketchy in hindsight, but I didn't want to take any major roads. I didn't want to take the straight shot to my apartment, which was on, a fairly major road where I knew there'd be traffic and I knew there'd be cops. It's like, all right, I'm going to take her through campus just so I can avoid cops. So I take her through campus, and there's one part of campus where you're kind of bordering a road, and it's very wooded. It's so sketchy sounding, but she slips in the pine straw. I'm kind of holding her up, we're walking, I'm kind of supporting her. She's kind of leaning on me. We're walking. I think we maybe got a half-mile walk. She slips and falls in the fucking pine straw, and a cop drives by right when she slips and falls. So all of a sudden, it looks like I'm this bro in the woods with this incredibly intoxicated girl fucking rolling around the fucking pine straw. Not a good look. The cops pull over, come check us out, and obviously she had been drinking. They asked me if I had been drinking. Yes. I said yes. Immediately put me in handcuffs. That was it, Didn't breathalyze me. Didn't say, be on your way, crazy kid. Put you in handcuffs because, you admitted to consuming alcohol. Anyway, first arrest. That was end of sophomore year. November of my junior year, so this is just a few months later, maybe 6 months later, Georgia Tech game, one of the biggest, funnest games of the year, right at the end of Thanksgiving break. Same thing, pregame all day for the game. Head back to the apartment after going downtown. We're talking, this is late, man. I think it was midnight, and I don't know what the fuck I was doing at midnight, but I am at my apartment, but I stumbled on this time capsule that me and my friend Lenny had made back in the day in high school. I think we made a time capsule at the end of high school that I don't know, we were gonna reflect on it years later. Anyway, I found this thing 3 years later. And so, my drunk ass at the time was like, I gotta open this up with Lenny and reflect on the 3 years that have passed. And so at midnight, drunk, I go over to my buddy Lenny, not drive. I walk to my buddy Lenny's fraternity house, which is smack dab in the middle of UJ's campus, wrestle him out of bed or whatever the fuck he was doing at the time. And oh, dude, let's open this time capsule. I ended up chilling with him at his fraternity house for the next couple hours, 2 or 3 in the morning. I'm like, all right, I gotta go back. Gotta go back home. And so I leave his fraternity house and start walking across campus to go back home. And I swear to God, dude, this is what happened. I'm walking past the biggest building on campus, and all the alarms start going off. This is a massive building. It's called the Student Learning Center. It's massive. This massive palace, brand new building, dope ass building. Heart of campus. I'm walking past it to go to my fucking apartment, and the thing is like has been breached, and all these alarms are sounding off. And next thing I know, all these cop cars are pulling up, and they surround me. I'm the only fucking person around, and apparently someone had tried to break in to this building, sounded the alarm, and I'm the only fucking living soul nearby. And so all these cops pull up, and they're like, show us your hands, drop whatever you have. I'm like, I literally have my hands up. Like, I don't remember guns being drawn necessarily, but maybe they were. I don't know. I was like, what the fuck is going on? And they come up to me like, what are you doing in the SLC? What are you doing here? And I just told them, like, listen, I'm just walking back from my buddy's fraternity house, walking to my apartment. And they're like, let us see some ID. And, no, they go, how old are you? And I was 20 at the time. It was November. I was born in February. I was 3 months shy of my 21st birthday. And I was like 21, just hoping they'd be like, all right, be on your way, kid. And they're like, let us see some ID. And I show him my ID. Or first I show him I don't remember exactly what happened. But anyway, either I showed him my real ID and I clearly wasn't 21, or I showed him my fake ID and it was clearly a fake ID. Either way, I was fucked, right? That was my second arrest. I think I got charged for, they asked me if I've been drinking. I said yes. How old are you? 21. I clearly wasn't 21. I don't remember what the fuck I got charged for, but I think it was fake ID and minor, and I think technically the charge is in possession of alcohol. I don't know, possessed it in my stomach, I guess, my liver. Second arrest. At UGA, if you get 2 arrests, you get kicked out of school. I think it's 2. I think it's like the standard's not even that crazy. I think it's 2 arrests in a year. Maybe it's 2 arrests total. But I think it's 2 arrests in a year. Like, they have some leeway. Like, listen, you get arrested once a year. I think that might be what it was. Anyway, I got arrested twice in 6 months. Bullshit arrests. Horseshit arrests. I don't ever drink and drive. I don't do stupid. I don't like break into places when I'm drunk. I really am. Like, believe me, I've gotten plenty fucked up, and I'm sure, and I know I've pissed people off when I'm drunk, but I'm not like a violent guy. I'm not, a predatory dude, and I'm not I think people would argue with this, but I'm not a reckless guy. Like, I don't take people's lives in danger by getting behind the wheel. Certainly I'm loud and what I would consider gregarious, what other people probably consider obnoxious, but I don't do stupid, criminal shit when I'm drunk. I don't need to be put in a cage because I'm intoxicated, although once again other people might argue with that. But certainly in either of these instances, I wasn't doing anything wrong. But second arrest, so I got kicked out of school, or at least the proceedings for me to get kicked out of school began. And so at that point, I was in the midst of trying to walk onto the team. I think during this whole arrest process, I was being informed by the football team that I wasn't going to be able to walk on. But I was in the process of it, so there was some question whether or not I was going to be able to. And what the first coach I did talk to, the tight ends coach, was a position I was going to try to play was tight end. He told me I need to put on 30 pounds. I weighed like 205 or something at the time. He's like, basically, dude, you need to be 230 minimum for us to even consider this. So I immediately started putting on tons of fucking weight in the weight room. I put on 30 pounds in like 3 months. But by the time I had done that, by the time I did put on those 30 pounds, A, I'd gotten arrested for the second time, and B, I'd been informed, listen, we don't have the budget right now to take random fucking students onto the University of Georgia football team. So I knew I needed to transfer. I needed to transfer for football reasons, to go to a less competitive football environment, and B, now that was being solidified because I was about to get kicked out of school. So I had settled on Louisiana Monroe, I guess because I could get in-state tuition there. I had family there. My dad, although I didn't have a relationship with my dad at the time, he lived in this like big plantation where he had grown up. We've talked about it on previous podcasts, but he grew up in this massive cotton and soybean plantation and in the middle of nowhere in Louisiana. So at least, and it was about 20, 30 minutes away from the college. So I was like, okay, I can crash there. Not that I wanted to spend any time with my dad, but I just, I had a lot of resentment to do at the time. And honestly, I wasn't even going to ask him. I was just like, fuck it. This is my house too. You never done shit for me. So I'm going to crash here if I want to, type of deal. So I did. I only ended up spending like a night or two there. But I guess that's why I chose ULM, because I could get in-state tuition and I had family in the area. And my brother and my older sister lived in the area as well. So I was like, okay, I can crash somewhere. I have some kind of support. And I get in-state tuition because my dad lives there. So I transferred. But before I transferred, I went through like the whole judicial process of getting kicked out of school. And I fought it. I wanted to be able to I promised my mom when I made the decision to go to University of Louisiana Monroe to try to walk onto the football team, I promised her that I wouldn't graduate from there. She graduated from there, and she just knew the quality of academic institution it was. And so I promised her I wouldn't graduate from there. So I transferred there. Oh, before I transferred there, I wanted to be able to transfer back to the University of Georgia if shit didn't go well. So I fought it through like the judicial process. I didn't just take like the expulsion or whatever. They let you, if you choose to, appeal the decision or whatever, and you go through essentially like a court proceeding where they appoint. It's all through the student judiciary. So you appear before like a panel of 3 student judges. And then there's a student like prosecutor and a student defense attorney. And actually the student defense attorney was a good friend of mine, Mike McDonald, who has appeared briefly on one of the episodes. He appeared when we did the NFL draft podcast. I think he's on the 3rd one. He's actually a coach for the Baltimore Ravens now. He's the linebackers coach for the Baltimore Ravens. Anyway, he's always been a highly successful dude, and so at UJ, of course, he was like, on the student judiciary. He was, of course, in a position of power even as a fucking student. And so he was I guess I chose him. I had a relationship with the dude. Him and I were real good buddies in middle school in particular. And so anyway, he was my court appointed or student judiciary appointed defense attorney, and so he recommended that I take like a very standard kind of legal defense. I remember at the time, and I remember thinking like, no, dude, I'm going all in on some bizarre fucking defense. And I guess I can admit it now. I just came up with this elaborate fucking lie, where basically I identified essentially a witness, a friend of mine who could account for my whereabouts and activity for 24 hours of the day I was arrested. And so I brought in this slew of witnesses that I think at the time they told me they'd like never seen anything like it. We had to transfer to a larger room because usually, it's like the student and maybe their parents and then the judges and then the 2 attorneys. But I brought in like this entire audience to back me up, and I kept bringing all of these witnesses to the stand to be like, yeah, I woke up with Alex that morning, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. I was with him, didn't consume any alcohol, and then I'd bring the next witness, like, yeah, I was with him from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m., didn't consume any alcohol. Next witness, yeah, I was with him from 12 p.m. to 4 p.m., didn't consume any alcohol. It just ran through that, came with this elaborate fucking story of how there's no way I could have consumed alcohol that day. I wasn't breathalyzed, so how could you possibly suspend me? There's no objective evidence that, I did what the police are telling me I did. It's certainly a defense that would have held up in court, I think, and it held up in front of this fucking student court, and they let me off. And so I wasn't kicked out of school, but I still wanted to play football. So I transferred to this to University of Louisiana Monroe, and started like spring practice. But at the time, I was getting these really bad cramps in my calf. We hadn't started like padded practice yet. So we were just doing like little workouts and shit. And I was meeting with the training staff and just kind of like getting the paperwork filled out my first couple weeks on campus. And I kept having these horrible, especially when I was doing like cardio, having these horrible fucking cramps in my calves, like debilitating, like a cramp you get like temporarily in your calf, especially when dehydrated, but it would just go on the entire workout, go on for hours. It was so painful. So eventually they sent me off to an orthopedic surgeon. They told me I had compartment syndrome. And long story short, they're basically like, you're going to need surgery if you want to play football, especially at this size. At that time, I was like over 230 pounds. And I was used to walking around at shit. In high school, I probably walked around at 180, maybe. Now, today, I walk around at 200 to 210. And I was 230 at the time, so I was a big kid. And I was taking a lot of supplements, a lot of creatine, a lot of glutamine. I wasn't taking steroids or anything illegal, but I was taking all kinds of shit from GNC to bulk up. And so basically, like, listen, you need to lose all of this weight, all of this like extra muscle mass and water weight you have, to give your muscles a chance to just like deflame, to basically deflate, or you need to have surgery, and you're going to be out about a year. Like we're not even gonna talk about you playing football until a year from now, which would have been essentially right before I was gonna graduate college. So I was like, fuck it. And I gave it a shot. Now I'm having to weigh like my academic and then professional future versus like this kind of pipe dream of playing college football. Shit, I guess this isn't gonna work out. So I took a day to just kind of have a pity party, and then from there I accepted I wasn't going to play football, but I was stuck in fucking Monroe, Louisiana at the University of Louisiana Monroe for the entire spring semester of 2009. And so I took one day to basically cry and play video games. And then the next day I started volunteering at the Boys and Girls Club and training mixed martial arts, cage fighting, actually. This is just like a new avenue. So I'm going to like help little kids and then, punch people in the face. And the punching people in the face didn't last as long as the helping little kids. I trained for a few months, mixed martial arts, and when I started sparring, actually punching people in the face, I remember some fucking trained karate. I knew nothing, right? I'd never taken any martial arts. I knew shit. And I remember one day after practice, dude was like, "Hey, you want to spar?" And, so we put on the gloves and the headgear. And this dude's a little fucking ninja. He was so much smaller than me. I would fuck him up when we were wrestling and stuff, but we were just wrestling. That stuff, you can go hard and not really hurt each other. This is the first time, you could tell this dude's like, I'm going to get this motherfucker back. So it's like, hey, you want to spar after practice? I didn't know what sparring was. I'm thinking sparring is like, oh, you're just kind of touching each other. No, dude. We put on the gloves and the headgear, and this dude fucks me up. Like, just right off the bat, I throw like a couple jabs or something. Right off the bat, this dude does a spinning head kick and just rocks me across the face. Like, shin to the nose. My nose explodes. I've fucked up my nose and broken it before. I've never seen so much blood, dude. The mats we were on were just like puddled in blood, of my blood out of my nose. And I remember the next day I had a sociology test, and I go to sit down the sociology test, and I couldn't tell you what the fucking date was. And I was like, okay, maybe this whole getting punched and kicked in the face thing is not ideal as I'm trying to, finish up my college career and figure out what the fuck I'm going to do with my life. So I stopped training mixed martial arts, but kept working with the kids and eventually transferred back to UGA. And that's a big transitionary point for me, actually, because I started working with children. I started kind of getting this inclination. Okay, maybe this is what I want to do after school is work with like disadvantaged youth. And working at the Boys and Girls Club kind of set me on that path. And then that summer, I went to Costa Rica, actually, with University of Louisiana Monroe with the Spanish program. Because I was studying international affairs, but I didn't really have any international experience, period. But I was studying Spanish and I was studying international affairs. I was like, damn, I should probably get some, my hands dirty in Latin America in some form. I'm 20 years old. I don't really know how to do that. But, there was a quick study abroad program for just like a couple weeks in Costa Rica through the school. And this girl I was really into at the time was thinking about doing it. So I convinced her to do it so I could kind of have, in large part, have this... She's also dating somebody else at the time, and I was really trying to pull her my way. And I knew I was getting successful at doing that. I could feel like it was extracting. I know this is fucked up, but it's kind of extracting her from this relationship. And I thought if I could get her to Costa Rica, I could really close the deal, which is ultimately what happened. But also Latin American experience. And I identified for us, it wasn't entirely fucking narcissistic trying to win the girl. I wanted to experience Latin America. And then I identified, outside of the study abroad program, totally independently, some volunteer programs that her and I could do. So we'd, it's ultimately I ended up working in this space, like the volunteerism space. You're not actually like making a difference in anyone's lives really, but honestly, it's more beneficial to the volunteer than the people being volunteered for, in my opinion, right? It's exposure for me to of disadvantaged communities, that I had worked with in the United States. I was now getting that experience in Latin America. And so we did some volunteer programs, but that really opened up my eyes. Like, okay, I want to work with kids. I would like to work in Latin America next. So that started to like kind of set me on the path of the path I ultimately was going to go down after college. I get back to UGA my senior year. I have 1 year left. And my job that year, I always had some sort of federal work study job, right? If you come from, what the federal government considers a poor family, which my single mom met that criteria, they'll give you a job in college, right? It's like a $7 an hour job, but they basically are like, listen, we guarantee that you can do something, So every year I had a job. Like I said, my freshman year I was working at the gym in South Carolina. Sophomore year I worked at the library. And in the basement of the University of Georgia Library, literally putting like magnets inside the spine of books. So like you couldn't steal books, like the books would go off, would sound the alarm when you go off. That was my job. Like for a year, I would just sit and put magnets inside of books. That was my job sophomore year. Junior year, I worked at the, making the student IDs. Just in like this office in front of a computer, or someone would come down, sit down, I'd, take their picture and then print out their ID card. And then senior year, when I transferred back to UGA, my best job, they gave me a job as a tutor at a local elementary school, essentially working with special education kids. I worked with second, third, and fourth graders who were having trouble reading. So basically what I would do, I would just show up and be their reading buddy. I would pull these kids out of class who were the struggling readers, and we would sit down and read together and like work on their homework or their classwork and shit. And I really, really, really liked that. And I had no idea what the fuck I was going to do after college. I was thinking about staying, and it's teaching is kind of the family business, right? My mom was a school psychologist. My grandmother was an elementary school teacher. My older sister was a special education teacher at the time. And so like these three adults that raised me, these three women that raised me, were all working in education. So it's kind of all I knew. And I got great fulfillment out of it. And then also, I've touched on this before. It's like my mom had always, my mom let us make all our own mistakes, do whatever the fuck we wanted. She was an incredible mom, incredibly supportive. The one thing she kind of guided us professionally was you should work in an altruistic field, a field where you're helping people, where you're able to earn a living by helping people through like self-sacrifice. And so it's what I always wanted to do, or really always really knew to do at the time. And so I thought I was either going to get my master's in social work and become a social worker. I thought long and hard about joining the Peace Corps. But at the time, kind of reflecting back to OCD, I had a good freshman year with OCD, no medication, just kind of through grit. Then sophomore year, the OCD issues started to pop back up. By second semester, I'd got on a good medication regimen, and it wasn't that big of a deal. Junior year, that medication regimen kind of solidified, and I wasn't having really any major OCD issues junior year, sophomore year. But I wasn't totally confident in that. And after about a year of feeling healthy, I immediately wanted to get off the medication. I didn't want to have to be dependent on the medication. And so I was thinking, after I graduate college, okay, and I get a job and get kind of my life settled, I'm going to make an effort to get off this medication. And so I didn't think hopping in the Peace Corps right after college was going to be the best idea for the medication purposes. So I was like, I was essentially I was working as a tutor in elementary school, and I was, interacting with all these elementary school teachers. So that kind of seemed like a nice alternative. It seems kind of easier and more manageable than like doing Peace Corps at some fucking village in Guatemala. But like challenging enough to where I thought I was going to be making a difference and it would be worthwhile. But I didn't study education. I didn't know the path. I decided in my junior year I wanted to be a teacher, but I didn't know the avenue to be a teacher. From what I understood, you need to major in education and then whatever from there. So I started doing some Googling and research online, and I found programs like Teach for America and a program called the New Teacher Project. And the New Teacher Project is kind of an offshoot of Teach for America. It was founded by a former TFA alum, but it's the same concept, right? They recruited successful college students to teach in inner city, who had not studied education, to teach in inner city schools. So there's all these schools around America that are fucking horrendous that no one wants to teach in. And there's not enough, classically trained educators to teach in these schools. No one wants these fucking jobs. And so these nonprofits have developed, Teach for America primarily among them, to recruit successful college kids to basically go to it's like the military for teaching. You recruit the successful college kid, you send them off to like a 6-week boot camp to learn how to become a teacher, and then, you send them right into a school. So it's like they graduate college in May, June, July, teacher boot camp, August, in the school. And so that's what I did. I applied to the New Teacher Project, and I ended up doing the New Teacher Project particularly because they let Teach for America, you preference a region. And I ended up applying to Teach for America and didn't get in because I got arrested I guess I got arrested the month before I started the whole application process, or I guess it was right during the application process. So that didn't reflect very well on my application. It was 2 arrests in the last 6 months. And I think with the new teacher project was much more lenient. It was kind of the blue collar Teacher America. Teacher America was like all fucking summa cum laude, valedictorians, presidents of their fraternities, as all these Ivy Leaguers, essentially. That was Teach for America. And then New Teacher Project was kind of a third those people, then a third career changers, and then a third like adults, like 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds. So it was a third of us were kind of successful college kids. A third of us were like 20s, 30s, changing careers into teaching, and then a third of us were like older, like parents themselves, or I think we had I don't think we had any like senior citizens, but we had parents, kids, adults with kids in school. So a little different makeup there. And I guess they were willing to look the other way about my 2 recent arrests as well. And so, and the benefit of the new teacher project as well was that it allowed you to select specifically the city you wanted to teach in. Teacher America allowed you to preference regions. So you could say, I want to teach on the West Coast, or I want to teach in the Southwest, which could be Arizona, Utah, New Mexico. I want to teach in the South, which could be Atlanta, or it could be like Mississippi Delta. You would get regions, but you didn't know what state or what city necessarily you're going to be in. And it was just a preference list. You could have fucking the South as 4th on your list, and you get placed in fucking Biloxi, Mississippi. The new teacher project allowed you to apply specifically to Phoenix teaching fellows, Chicago teaching fellows, New Orleans teaching fellows. And at the time, the girl I had gone to Costa Rica with, that I had met at ULM, she was from Phoenix. And so I applied to Phoenix teaching fellows. That was my first. I applied to a bunch of them. I applied to New Orleans, Chicago, New York. But as soon as I got into Phoenix, I knew I was going to go there because I was still trying to keep this flame alive with this chick. Shouldn't call her this chick. Beautiful person who is still a friend of mine today. Lovely individual. Anyway, so I ended up graduating school, going off to teaching. I'm trying to think if I missed anything there. Major senior year. Senior year, her and I kind of did a long distance thing. Senior year was very enjoyable. Continued the partying back at UGA. Worked at the elementary school. But by the time I graduated, man, I was ready to go. The partying was getting a little too much. I was excited about being an adult. I was excited. I felt, like I said, man, without the OCD being a problem, college was a fucking breeze. It didn't feel like a challenge. Like, I had close to a 4.0 all college. I think maybe I graduated with like a 3.8. And I took a couple science classes that I had got a B in. And I think maybe I got a B in a Spanish class or two. And it was a breeze. I needed more shit. I was doing the Model UN thing. I was trying to play football. I was ready to go. Like, I wanted to do some different. I was ready to go. I knew I'd miss it, but I kind of had enough of college. And so I moved off to Phoenix. And I'm going to pause here for just a second. Alrighty, we're back. Graduate college, moved off to Phoenix. So literally, man, I remember we had our last like banger of a party, our college apartment. There were 4 of us living in this apartment, and of the group of our friends in college, we had all rotated through that apartment for 3 years. So sophomore year through junior year, there was, I think, 2 of us, not me, 2 people that of our friend group that lived there all 3 years, and then some combination of 2 more of us lived in that apartment for 3 years, dude. It was, and this was like the primary place we would hold our pre-games and stuff, our parties. So this place was just a mess. Anyway, we had our last kegger there, and I can remember, like, on Saturday or Friday and Saturday of the last day of classes, doing keg stands all night long, and gargoyles where you hop on top of the keg and like squat on it and just drink straight from the spout. Just getting absolutely fucking obliterated, complete debauchery on like a Saturday. And then on like that, maybe it was Friday, I guess we had our last party, but like Monday or Tuesday, I'd gone from Athens, Arizona, packed up my little 2-door Honda Accord, drove across the country, picked up the girl I had been dating at the time in Louisiana, and we just drove across the country in 2 days, made it to Phoenix, and next thing I know, I'm in teacher boot camp. So it's like one day I'm upside down doing fucking keg stands, and 72 hours later I'm in, sitting in some Phoenix elementary school district classroom, staring at some veteran teacher teaching me like the ins and outs of like teaching legalese. It's like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, what have I done? I was excited to be there, but it was like, oh my God, I'm an adult now. And so I was, we did teacher boot camp for 6 weeks, and then shit gets real. Then all of a sudden I am a 22-year-old keg stander in charge of a bunch of fucking children within a matter of weeks. It's like, what am I doing here? They're actually going to let me do this? And once again, I didn't study education. I'd had 6 weeks of basically like how not to fucking get fired, like what's legal as a teacher. And on top of that, dude, I wasn't just teaching like, hey, here's your third grade classroom, which don't get me wrong, that's incredibly challenging in and of itself. And in some ways much more challenging than what I was doing just because you have so many kids. But I was teaching at a self-contained behavior school. So the school I was teaching at I taught in the Roosevelt School District in South Phoenix, a very rough elementary school district, kindergarten through 8th grade. And so the school, there's like 20, 30 elementary schools in the district. And our school was one of those schools, except our school was just for the kids that got kicked out of all of the other schools. And we're talking kids that get kicked out in fucking kindergarten. So we're talking real monsters. I know that's not like PC to say. And of course they're not monsters. They're little fucking children, right? And, some of them were suffering from deep-seated mental illness. Like kind of, I don't want to say incurable shit, but like there's some kids that aren't going to be saved. Some kids are going to end up in prison. And plenty of the kids that I end up teaching or coming through my classroom or that I interact with at school did end up in prison. But a lot of the kids I taught, man, and this is where like... no child is an actual monster, right? Even if they're suffering from some major psychosis, right? It's, not their fault. They're a fucking child. But the majority of the kids I taught, honestly, were, just lacked discipline in the home. Of the 3 years that I taught at that school, there's all kids that have gotten kicked out of their elementary school. So like I said, like if you're in kindergarten and you're stabbing your fucking classmates with scissors, they're kicking you out. There's only so many times they're going to let you stab your classmates with scissors, and then you're getting kicked out. And so if you were that kid, you got sent to our school. And so if you were a kindergartner that got kicked out, was stabbing kids with scissors, then or setting shit on fire, then you went to kindergarten at our school. We had like, 2 kindergartens, 2 kindergarten classrooms, 2 first grade classrooms, 2 second grade classrooms, 2 third grade classrooms to accommodate all the kids that were getting kicked out throughout the school year. My first year, I was 4th grade. So all of the 4th graders that had gotten kicked out of school in our district came to my classroom. And the majority of the kids that I taught, of the 3 years that I taught that school, my first 2 years I taught 4th, my last year I taught 5th. Of the 3 years I taught there, I had one kid who had a dad that lived at home. Every other kid lived at home with a single mom, a grandma, an aunt, or was in foster care. One kid in 3 years had a dad that lived at home. And that kid was by far the best behaved kid I ever had. He had no business being in our school. Quite frankly, that kid really had much more autistic behaviors that were being, loud noises. We went to he went to a crazy inner city school, even the one that wasn't the behavior schools. They were pretty fucking wild. This kid didn't like loud noises. He didn't like people touching him. And so he would have these kind of explosions of behavior, but he did not need to be at our school, right? Sounds bad, but at some point it's like a jail, right? You're sending all of the bad kids to one school. So, jail is not jail in American society is not a rehabilitative place, right? You become a worse person by going there. You're surrounded by a bunch of fucking criminals. It's the same thing, certainly with children, right? They're even more impressionable than criminals. They're already the bad kid at the school they're at, and then they get sent to the school where it's only bad kids. It's like near fucking impossible to get a kid back on track. But I think I was highly successful in doing so with a lot of my fucking students. I was a very successful teacher in that environment. If I do say so myself, honest, it's like probably the proudest 3 years of my life. I was very good at what I did there. I knew what they're going through. Fortunately, I had an incredibly competent and capable mother growing up who let us make our own mistakes and be kids, but she didn't deal with any bullshit. You know, we didn't fuck around. You know, my mom didn't have problems with behavior from us. We weren't getting suspended from school. We weren't even getting in like detentions. I was a class clown and talked a lot, and I'm sure pissed a lot of teachers off, but I knew the rules, and that came from my mom. She did an excellent job playing both the maternal and paternal role in throughout my childhood. But I knew what those kids are going through, man. I knew what those kids needed. They needed paternal influence in their life. They needed discipline in their lives. And so that's what I provide in my classroom. My classroom was essentially boot camp, man. You come in, you do what I say, you sit down, you shut up, you get the work done. If you refuse to get the work done, there'll be a consequence for it. You're going to have to be removed from the class. So go to a separate room to reflect on why you're not getting your work done. But when you come back, that work's going to be right fucking there waiting for you. And that's essentially the crux of everything I did. It was an economy, right? If you did what I asked, and what I asked was, I'm not asking you to do fucking handstands. I'm asking you to do the work that's, required by the state. That is, the academic material you need to learn to get back on track and back into normal school and hopefully graduate high school. And so that's what I did. If you do what I ask, you get rewarded for it. So just in simple terms, right? If you complete this math assignment, you get 5 minutes on the computer. Or, you complete your writing assignment, you get 5 minutes outside, If you don't, not only do you get taken out of the classroom and have to sit in a room where you're reflecting your behavior, or like with, I had a discipline system, right? It would start with, a warning for not doing what's asked of you. Then you have to go sit in the corner and time out. Then I forget what all the steps were. But anyway, the ultimate result would be you having to go sit in a separate room by yourself with, like a parapro to reflect on your behavior. But there was never an escape. That work would follow you to that behavior room, and that work would be right back in front of you to get back. And that was the crux of all the success I had in that school, is here's what is being asked of you. And it's not a debate. This work's gonna get done. You're either gonna get it done now when I ask you to do it, in the manner I ask you to do it, and you're going to receive a positive consequence, or you're going to receive a consequence, right? Consequence can be both positive and negative. You're going to be rewarded for that behavior. So either get it done now and you get rewarded, you get to do what you want, you get free time and a positive note home, or you can choose to hem and haw and not do it, and in which case you're going to get a negative consequence. When everyone else goes out to recess, you're going to sit in a room by yourself. When everyone else is sitting here doing their work, as I asked them the first time, you're going to be sitting in the corner staring at the wall. And when you get back, it's going to be right there on your fucking desk. And that's what I did for 3 years. It was just that. It was just holding kids accountable and letting them know when you do good things happen in your life. When you do bad things happen in your life. And that was it. And I was incredibly successful. I think, if you ask my colleagues, they would say I was successful in that role as well. And I think if you ask my students, they would certainly say that as well. So I did that for 3 years, and it was nuts. Personally, there were some ups and downs during that time. Kind of what's going on in my life outside of teaching at that time. I got really into working out. Started doing CrossFit, really into physical fitness. Herniated a disc in my back doing CrossFit competitions, just doing crazy shit, right? I didn't have any proper Olympic lifting form. I was out in the desert, these CrossFit competitions, all these fucking animals that have been lifting weights their whole life. And I'm just ranking this 155-pound bar over my head, and with totally incorrect form, just, twisting and jerking. All these fucking lifting champions next to me doing it properly. Anyway, I fucked up my back pretty bad during that time. And quick aside here, I think it's pretty important. I was actually discussing this with a friend on the phone recently, this week. I fucked up my back. I herniated a disc in my back, and it was debilitating, man. If you've ever herniated a disc or had low back issues, it sucks, man. So I was having, sciatica pain all down my left leg, originating my low back and shooting like a sword all the way into stabbing through my leg all the way down to my foot. And I went to all kinds of doctors. First, I just went through the chain of custody in the medical profession, right? You go to your primary care. Primary care gives you an anti-inflammatory. Shit doesn't work. Then he writes you a prescription for physical therapy. The physical therapist fumbles and bubbles their way through what they think it is without actually getting any imaging on it, because the insurance won't pay for an MRI off the bat. So the physical therapist gives you an incorrect diagnosis, and you go to physical therapy for 4 months doing all kinds of horse shit that's not doing anything, and then nothing gets improved. So now you've wasted 6 months. Really, you just want an MRI from the jump so they can tell you on a picture exactly what's wrong. So 6 months, you're getting treated for a torn ligament when really you have a fucking disc that's exploded in your between your vertebrae. So I finally get an MRI, and they say, oh, your disc exploded in your low back. And then it's all, you go back to the physical therapist, and you're changing up your treatment. it's not getting any better. We're getting epidural steroid injections in your spine to reduce the inflammation. That shit's not working. So then now the physical therapists start sending you to orthopedic surgeons, and the orthopedic surgeons are talking about potentially cutting your spine open and taking out that disc, and you're 22 and you're 23, I guess it was at the time. Like, what the fuck is going on? And each orthopedic surgeon's telling you, hey, yeah, you're never going to run long distance again. You're never going to lift weights again. You can still walk, you can still swim, you can still do the elliptical machine. Like, what are you talking about, bro? I was about to go be in fucking Division I college football team a year and a half ago. What do you mean I'm never gonna lift weights again? What are you talking about? But that devastated me, man. Fucking devastated me. I honestly thought my back was permanently damaged. And I was going to need back surgery to alleviate the issues I was experiencing. And that back surgery is going to leave my spine unstable. Or if I wasn't going to get back surgery, I was just going to have to really tiptoe my way through physical activity for the rest of my life, dude. I was devastated. Oh, that was bad. And at the time, I was also trying to come off the Prozac. After my second year teaching, I think it was, going into my third year. I think it was the second semester, second year, I started coming off the Prozac. And so I think by the summer between second and third year teaching, I was off the Prozac altogether. And starting third year teaching, I was off the Prozac altogether. And on top of that, this back shit was going on, and I wasn't able to exercise like I typically was. All I was doing was swimming. I was devastated, man. I went through for the first time, deep depression. By the time I got off the Prozac, the OCD symptoms did not return. It wasn't like all of a sudden I was washing my hands 100 times again. It was like my brain, it was like the serotonin that was coming from the Prozac was the only fuel my brain had. And off the Prozac, my brain was just dry. It was like the engine wasn't lubricated. I'm going to keep drawing analogies, but I'm just trying to paint the picture here. I don't know how to exactly describe it. I wasn't experiencing OCD symptoms like I was in the past. I wasn't experiencing like depression necessarily, although the issue was much more of a depressive symptom than it was OCD symptoms. It was just like my brain didn't have enough gas. Or like, I'm going to draw a few now. It's like my brain didn't have enough gas. Like it was constantly running on empty. Also, it was like the lubrications of like in the gears, there was no lubrication in the gears of my brain. So they're just like grinding against each other, just like barely moving, churning and sparking. It's like something was broken. And the other analogy I draw is like a computer with a virus. I remember back in the day, or maybe I haven't had a PC in over a decade. Macs are fucking amazing and never get viruses. But I remember in the back of the day, especially when you're downloading porn on a PC, you would get like these constant windows would pop up in your brain over and over, and you close it and another 100 would pop up. You try to close it out and another 100 would pop up. You close it out and another 100 would pop up. And then you have to like reboot your computer, and then it reboots in safe mode, and it's like moving kind of slow, and it's half of its operating ability, if that. That's what my brain felt like. It was like all these viruses, windows popping up, and it just wasn't functioning normally. And then on top of that, the back issue, I was being told like essentially I'd never engage in any sort of rigorous physical activity again by multiple different fucking surgeons, not just physical therapists. Anyway, when I was at my wit's end with the back, I reached out to an old CrossFit coach that I knew had a similar back issue, and he recommended this book by Dr. John Sarno. I think it's called Healing Back Pain. He's written a few books, this dude, Dr. John Sarno. Dude, everyone out there listening, whether or not you've had back pain or not, read up on this motherfucker's work. I know this shit sounds ridiculous, but I give it my 1,000% recommendation. I think it's 100% real. Essentially, the crux of the book is that like back pain is horseshit. Yes, injuries do happen to the back. Yes, discs get herniated. But it's not as if the spine in particular is this incurable object when it gets injured. The body, and this goes back to what I was saying at the very beginning of this podcast in terms of the body's ability to heal itself. When I was born a stillbirth and I came back to life, this is real shit. And when the doctors cut my femoral vein in half, and under any normal circumstance, you have no blood flow from the fucking femoral vein down to your legs, you're going to need your leg amputated. My body, in its first fucking days of existence, created an entire detour of veins around that femoral vein my body has a system of veins that other people's bodies do not have. My body just miraculously created it. Your body's an incredible organism, man, and it's capable of healing itself. It's not capable of necessarily curing itself from cancer. Well, that's a different fucking discussion of where cancer comes from. But basically, this doctor's book says you have a back injury, but it's not the end of the world. And really, that back injury is now acting, your body's using that injury as a distraction. And so, yes, your back can get injured, or other parts of your body can get injured, but unless it's just some devastating, catastrophic, everything's broken and torn apart injury, your body can heal it on its own. And particularly with back pain, there's an injury, that injury gets healed, but your body goes back to that injury. And I may be describing this wrong. It's been years since I've read the book, but essentially, like, your body's using that as a distraction from your body is using that pain as a distraction to distract you from the actual psychological distress you're experiencing. And he goes back to repressed anger. He thinks it's mostly repressed and unexpressed anger that is causing these symptoms to persist. So you hurt your back, like you throw out your back, like, oh my God, my back is hurt. But then typically that's happening during a period of intense stress in your life. I know this sounds ridiculous, dude, but that was the most stressful year. I was incredibly stressed out during that time in my life, trying to really save these kids' lives. I dove in head first, completely inundated myself in being the best teacher possible. I'd go to bed at 8:30 every night and wake up at 4:30 every morning. I would go out on Fridays and Saturdays and do social shit, but like, my entire life was designed around being the best teacher I possibly could. I would have like romantic relationships, and these girls would want to develop them into something more. And I would tell them, like, listen, we can take this thing as far as you want, as long as but you only get to see me Friday afternoon through Sunday afternoon. Because Sunday afternoon, Sunday night, I'm lesson planning and I'm going to bed at 8:30. And then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'm going to bed at 8:30 every night. And I'm waking up at 4:30 every morning. And in order for me to do that, like, I got to have all my routine in a row. And there's no space or time for romantic relationships. There's on the weekend, Friday night, all day Saturday, Sunday morning, we can hang out. Other than that, it's not going to happen. And that's how I arranged my entire life. Was in pursuit of, helping these kids. But that shit was stressful. And so that's what happened. I injured my back, and then it kept being exacerbated and was never healing itself. Because I kept being told by every medical professional I would see that I was suffering from some essentially incurable injury. And then on top of that, I wasn't properly managing all of the stress, A, of teaching, and then B, all of the repressed kind of anger and regret over OCD. And so I read this dude's book, and basically he's just like, go back to working out. Or go back to whatever it is that you were doing that hurt your back. Don't be afraid of it and go back to doing it. Which to me was fucking insane. I'd spent the past 2 years in physical therapy and like really tiptoeing around everything. I'd spent almost 2 years at that point just swimming. And that was killing me. And at the time I decided I was going to, I'll get into some more details here in a second, but eventually by the time my time in Phoenix had wrapped up, I was going to move down to Honduras and run a small nonprofit down there. And at the time, I'm reading this book about back pain, and I was debating back and forth whether I was going to have surgery on my back as I was 24-year-old at that time. And fortunately, I decided not to. And at this point, I'm like leaving Phoenix, moving down to Honduras, and I had this I was terrified. I knew I was not going to have access to any medical care in Honduras, not to mention there wasn't going to be fitness facilities where I could tiptoe around my back anymore, swimming pools and aerobics classes and yoga studios, this kind of, I don't want to say light, like soft core exercising, but, shit that was low impact exercise was not going to be available in Honduras. I was going to have fucking paved roads to go for runs on. And then these like real meatheady, like quote unquote gyms, really like just like these like abandoned factories where all of these rusted weightlifting equipment from the 80s was stored, where it's the gyms down in Honduras. And so, but I read this dude's book and I was like, fuck it, move down to Honduras. I'm going to start lifting weights again. And so I literally started in Honduras lifting fucking cinder blocks, bags of cement, buckets of dirt, and running. Just like the most gritty, grimy workouts ever. It's like this dude's book said I can just get back to getting after it, and I just started getting after it. And so I've got this one dude on one hand in this book telling me go back to doing whatever you need to be doing, and then I have every mainstream medical professional under the sun, from primary care physicians to orthopedic surgeons to specifically spinal or neurological surgeons to physical therapists. All of those motherfuckers telling me you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this, you can't do that. You're gonna need surgery. You're gonna need to do it this way. You need to strengthen your core. For years, dog. And then I have this one book telling me, you're fine. It's in your head. And dude, I joined a gym, kept lifting cinder blocks, kept running on fucking pavement, pounding the pavement with this spine that should have, debilitated me, and I was fine. And I've never looked back since. Never looked back since. So I know this is tricky. I've now on this podcast like shat on psychiatrists and told people with mental illness not to take pills. And now I'm telling people with back pain or really any fucking pain, unless your arm's fucking snapped in half, like your body is much more capable of healing itself than you recognize. Have faith in your body. Treat your body well. Feed it clean fuel. Get proper sleep. Drink lots of water. Your body is a miraculous organism. It can heal itself. I promise you that. I'm not a fucking doctor, so I don't know if I need to put a disclaimer on all this. Any of my advice is just based on my life experience. But I'm telling you, dude, like a lot of these problems, both psychological and physical, can be solved on your own. Anyway, another issue I was dealing with at the time was coming off that medicine. I referenced it kind of talking about the back pain, but I was trying to come off the Prozac and shit got fucking scary. And it was the two. It was coming off the Prozac, the crazy job with the kids, these behavior kids, and then coming off the Prozac, the job, and then the back pain created this kind of perfect storm where I got really in a real dark place my third year teaching out there. Suicidal again, really contemplating taking my own life. Not as intensely, and like it wasn't constant ideation about killing myself as it was in middle school and high school, but it got dark. It got dark to the point where once, like I said, it felt like my brain had a computer virus and it just wasn't functioning. And it just got to the point where it was like, man, I'd rather not exist at all than exist like this every day. So towards the end of, or towards second semester of my third year, I got on the medication or got back on the Prozac. Once again, it wasn't barbarians at the gate of my castle at this point, but it just kind of, it was like putting oil back into my engine. It allowed things to fire more smoothly, and it wasn't OCD symptoms that dissipated, but it was just like, okay, I guess my brain's got fuel now, but you can't help but realize at that point, it's like, fuck, I guess my brain's addicted to Prozac. Because I got on the Prozac to alleviate the OCD symptoms, but really what the Prozac did was kind of give your brain the space to reflect on how ridiculous the OCD compulsions were. And so once you're able to kind of realize how ridiculous the OCD compulsions were, and that if you don't wash your hands, 73 times, that like your mom's not going to die. Once you're able to like wrap your head around that concept, you're like, the OCD kind of fades away. I'm still obsessive about certain things, about certain routines. I still have trouble with making sure the door's locked or the stove's off, but it's not like taking over my life. And it's no longer like, okay, if I don't turn that stove on and off X number of times, something horrible is going to happen. It's just more like, okay, did I really turn that stove off? I remember turning off, but let me check. It's much more of just like being really organized and kind of more low level OCD stuff. But when I got off the Prozac, it wasn't as if all of these OCD symptoms returned. It was just all of a sudden my brain didn't have the serotonin fuel anymore. It's like my brain had become addicted to the Prozac. It felt like I was off a drug. So that was scary, and it's still scary. Because like I said, I'm still on it, and I'm almost 2 hours in here, so I'll wrap up all of this certainly within the next hour. We're going to keep this under 3 hours for sure. So I finished up teaching in Phoenix. I'm back on the Prozac when I go back down to Honduras. And in I'd mentioned I wanted to be in the Peace Corps, or I was thinking about doing the Peace Corps when I graduated college. And it was always something I still wanted to do, or at least work in the developing world, hands-on, and I was working in poor communities in the United States, but having studied international affairs, I knew poor communities in the United States were nothing compared to poor communities in the developing world, and for lack of a better term, the third world, right? A poor community, the inner city in the United States is like a fucking paradise if you're living in Somalia, or Honduras, where I ended up working. So I applied to the Peace Corps, actually before my third year even started. My brain was all over the place at this point, coming off the Prozac, so I just wasn't theme crew. But I had agreed to come back and teach for a third year. The Teach for America Teaching Fellows program's typically only 2 years. Oh, and during that time, we had to get our master's degree as well, as part of in order for the state of Arizona to certify us as teachers and allow us to teach in the classroom. We had to get our master's degree concurrently with these first 2 years teaching. So we did the teaching boot camp right before we started, after right before we started teaching, after college graduation. We did the teacher boot camp. They sent us off into schools. And so that first year, you're just drowning, right? None of us have ever taught before. We don't know what the fuck we're doing. We're just figuring it out as we go along. And then at night, not every night, but at night, we have to go to master's classes. And so for the first 2 years, not only are you figuring out how to become an educator, you're also having to get your master's degree in education. In my case, special education. So we did that at Arizona State University. So got my master's after 2 years, had agreed to come back for a third year, but was also looking beyond the third year. So I applied to Peace Corps. I always wanted to do Peace Corps. I got accepted to Peace Corps to go to, what are they going to send me? Peru. They're going to send me to Peru to teach in Peru. And I was going to agree to do that after my third year teaching. And then right around that time, after my first, every summer, you have summers off as a teacher, I would do some kind of project or do something different, not just chill. So after my first year teaching, I went down, and I've talked about this in other podcasts, I went down with my younger sister, Morgan, and her good friend in college, Sam Ryu, who's appeared on the podcast multiple times, one of my, a brother, honestly, at this point, Sam Ryu. They had founded a nonprofit of their own, a small nonprofit that was basically taking Western college students, I think it was American Canadian college students, down to Honduras to study the role that nonprofit organizations played in Honduran society. And they had founded it, and so I'd done that quick volunteer work and study abroad in Costa Rica. Other than that, I didn't have much experience outside the United States. But they're like, hey, we could use some help. You want to come down with us? And they're still in college at the time. And they founded this organization. I'm like, fuck yeah, let's do it. So after my first year teaching, I went down with them to Honduras to set up this organization. And it was a mess. It was a crazy mess. It was so much shit went wrong. But incredible experience that summer. Got to know a lot of nonprofits down there in Honduras. Came back, taught my second year. That summer after second year teaching, I went to live with my brother in D.C. and he was working in was like an elected political official in D.C. So worked with some political shit with him. He was also starting like a green energy investment group, like kind of raising capital for solar projects in the D.C. area, and just kind of basically interning with him in politics and like getting this green energy business started. So spent my second summer doing that. And then towards the end, I was like, okay, I need to look for what I'm going to do, start planning for what I'm going to do after my third year teaching. So I applied to Peace Corps, got accepted to Peace Corps. They're going to send me off to Peru. Right after I got accepted to Peace Corps and agreed to go with them, I get contacted by an organization down in Honduras that was a partner organization. And Sam, the dude I had gone down to Honduras with my sister, he had graduated at that point and was working down for that organization, for one of the organizations we had partnered with down in Honduras. He was working with them full time as their raising funds internationally. Really, Sam did fucking everything for that organization, but technically, I think he was like the fundraising guy. She's like, hey, we got a partner organization down here that's looking for basically like a person to run their show. Like it was called the Honduras Fellow. Basically you're going to be the organization down in Honduras. You should, they're looking for somebody, you should apply. I'd already gotten accepted to Peace Corps. I was like, oh, dude, this sounds awesome. I'd love to go down and work in Honduras again. I know people down there. Sam's going to be down there. My younger sister at the time was about to graduate and was talking about moving down there. I was like, oh, that'd be awesome if all three of us could go down there and like work full time together. And so that's what we ended up doing. I ended up having to tell Peace Corps thanks, but no thanks. I ended up taking this job down in Honduras. Basically being like, I was the only member of our organization down there. We had another fellow in Thailand, and I think they're about to send another fellow to Uganda. And I was the Honduras guy. And my job description was a little unclear. I was basically like an education consultant. So I was basically helping like Sam's organization set up after school programs for their high school and college students. Then I was helping another organization that was building elementary schools. And so I kind of played a role as like a pseudo principal at this new elementary school they were building for a minute. And then on top of that, I was supposed to teach like various like multimedia classes at a local high school. And then I was supposed to use my connections with the students with all of these three separate institutions. I was supposed to kind of organize digital media projects that they were going to create, and then that we were going to share with the fellows in Thailand and Uganda. It was all very hippy dippy. Listen, this is what's up in the nonprofit world a lot of times, especially small nonprofits. You've got a bunch of bleeding heart liberals with a lot of money and a lot of degrees in the United States, and they want to have an impact on the world. And I know that sounds incredibly cynical and critical. It's cool. Like, that's a much better use of your time than, fucking, I don't know, drilling oil wells or, I don't know, whatever. Day trading. I don't know. Their heart's in the right place, but it's not an effective means of, like, development work. You can't send down some fucking 24. Anyway, it was very ambitious and, like, well-intentioned shit that was just completely unorganized and not realistic at all. And quite frankly, like, it was much more fluff. Like, why? Anyway, that became very clear by as soon as I got down there. And then on top of that, Honduras is an incredibly violent place. In 2009, Honduras underwent a coup d'etat. They overthrew the president, ousted the president. Essentially, the country's under military rule. And on top, and then society basically just imploded after that in Honduras, and organized crime stepped in, and essentially, and even still to this day, but especially at the time we were living down there, organized crime kind of ran the country in conjunction with the police. The police were very much intertwined with organized crime. There's a lot of political upheaval. There wasn't even any real clear sense of, like, the president in power. Is he legitimate? There's a period of time where I wasn't sure who is the president, sort of thing. Just a fucking mess. And at the time we were down there, Honduras had the highest murder rate of any country in the world. So, more people murdered per day than any other country on the planet. The most violent country on the planet, outside of, a country, probably Afghanistan or, Iraq at the time was more deaths per day, right? But outside of a country that's embroiled in an actual, war, Honduras was embroiled in its own war with organized crime. Like I said, more murders per day than any other country on the planet. That's where we were living. And you would see it every night. I remember sleeping down there the first few nights. I'd hear pop, 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 pop every night when I go to bed. I was like, man, these fuckers love fireworks down here. But it wasn't, man. I learned very quickly. Those are gunshots that I was falling asleep to every night. And we had a cool little house. Me and Sam ended up living together. And we had a house where we would go and smoke weed actually, that's where I became a big pothead, was down in Honduras, because you couldn't leave the house past midnight. So, our best form of recreation was buying this shitty weed that you could buy, like an ounce for $1. But it's horrible weed, and we just roll a joint after joint and go up on the roof and smoke it and chill and just reflect on life. And actually, Sam and I, first podcast I ever had was down there in Honduras. 2013 presidential election. Sam and I started the Honduras podcast. I think it's still out there on iTunes or wherever you get podcasts. I think we recorded like 3-5 episodes maybe, just covering the Honduran presidential election at the time. Anyway, we'd go up on our roof and smoke weed, and you'd see people get shot or robbed up there. It's a crazy place. And my younger sister, was living in San Pedro Sula. We were living in El Progreso, which is kind of the sister city of San Pedro Sula, 20-30 minutes away. San Pedro Sula was, we were living in the most violent country on the planet, and then the most violent city in particular on the planet was San Pedro Sula. Like, the murder rate in San Pedro Sula was significantly higher than, Honduras more broadly. San Pedro Sula was the most violent city on the planet. My sister was living right there, and we were living, just outside of it. And so very quickly I would have to send these weekly reports of just like how projects are going and just how things are going generally down in Honduras, to my bosses for the organization I was working for. So I would report like, yeah, another shooting this week. Like essentially an armed invasion of like the little town where the elementary school I was working at. And so eventually they're like, you got to get out of there. And they evacuated they canceled the program and tried to evacuate the program altogether. And I told them, like, listen, man, I gave up. I was going to go down the Peace Corps, which is a really cool opportunity to come down here to do this job. They wanted me to go back to DC and take an office gig for a little bit. And then I think maybe they're going to make me the Uganda guy. And I was like, I don't want to go to fucking Africa. I want to be in Honduras. My sister's down here. Now, like, my best friend is down here. I have friends down here now. Not to mention, I like the fact that it's fucking crazy. I like the fact that it's the most violent place in the world. Like, this is a big reason why I chose to be down here, was that it's a fucking war zone, essentially. If y'all don't want to stay down here, that's fine, but I'm staying. And so I basically just, they stopped paying me, and I just kept working on my projects. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't like fucking Mother Teresa. I wasn't, sun up to sun down, grinding away for free. I took a step back, started smoking a lot of weed, and started working on those projects, certainly at my pace. But, just because I wanted to, there was no professional connection at the time. There was no, just Alex volunteering in the middle of fucking Honduras. And so I did that for a year. Made some awesome friends. Was dating a Honduran girl for a little bit. Really fucking started perfecting my Spanish, getting fluent with Spanish. What went next? Let's just wrap up. Let's wrap this bitch up in the next, certainly next hour. So from there, I'm 25, I guess 26. Maybe I turned at that point. Wasn't really sure what was going to be next. I didn't want to go back to like straight teaching. I wanted to travel at that point in Latin America. I didn't have a ton of, I guess I had some money saved up. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. But anyway, my older sister, who was teaching a self-contained autism class in Chicago at the time, she had her second kid. And so I had my master's degree in special education. So she went on maternity leave. So I went up to Chicago after I wrapped up my stuff down in Honduras. And I knew that gave me like 2 months, to have a job, be with my sister, be with my 2 new nieces. And so I substitute taught my sister's self-contained autism class while she was on maternity leave till the end of the school year, till the end of I guess I'd have been the 2013, 2014 school year. Then I got a job down in Costa Rica, where I was basically running study abroad programs for high schoolers. So I lived down in this job was fucking awesome. I lived Costa Rica versus Honduras. They're both in Central America, but you could not have 2 different worlds. Costa Rica is like this relative to Central America, very organized, efficient, relatively uncorrupt government. It's just a magical, beautiful place. Honduras is magical and beautiful in its own right too, but it doesn't have the governmental infrastructure, the safety and security to really access all of its natural beauty. Costa Rica does. Costa Rica thrives on tourism. I don't think Costa Rica has like a standing army. It's just an awesome little Shangri-La in the middle of Central America, which is otherwise just a kind of fucking disastrous area of the planet. Anyway. So I got this job in Costa Rica running study abroad programs. I lived in this like beach town right in this like bay. It's called Coconut Beach, Playa del Coco, Coconut Beach. And it's exactly what it sounds like, dude. It was so nice. I lived in like this hotel. And then like the organization I was working for rented out this hotel essentially, kind of an Airbnb, hotel kind of, more open though. A compound is really what it was. And we would bring, fucking 50 high schoolers down for 2 weeks, and we'd work on a volunteer project in the mornings at like a local school. Like I would take my 20 kids off to do, work at our local school, and then there were like 3 or 4 other me's in my position, and they'd take their 20 kids off or whatever, 15 kids. And then they would take them to Spanish class and then do an activity. Basically, I was running a study abroad program for high schoolers. We'd volunteer, they'd take Spanish lessons, and then we'd do some sort of cultural activity. And we do that for 2-week periods. We'd have, a group of 40 come down, run that for 2 weeks, then another group of 40 down, run that for 2 weeks. I did that for the summer of 2014. That was super cool, man. Super cool. Costa Rica was so amazing. I was really locking in my Spanish at the time, and I met this amazing Costa Rican girl just one day on the beach, man. I was just going for a jog on the beach, and I'd seen this girl before, just stunning Costa Rican girl with these 2 like ferocious pit bull type dogs. And I passed her before once, and like almost couldn't believe what I saw. And I was going for a run on the beach one day, and I passed her, and I was just like, I can't pass the opportunity up, and just like stopped and was like, hey, can I get your number? Just like straight up. And we did, and we started hanging out and then essentially dating that whole summer. And I ended up doing? I ended up applying again to the Peace Corps at the time. During that summer, I was like, I think maybe I might accept the Peace Corps. So I applied to the Peace Corps again, got accepted in the Peace Corps again. This time they're going to send me off to the Dominican Republic. And then, what happened? I was dating her, thinking I was going to do the Peace Corps in Dominican Republic. When I was living in Honduras at the time, I started just like blogging about Honduran politics. And I really started shifting my political view from like super liberal, typical, like kind of... think you know everything, college student, super liberal approach to life, borderline socialist. All of a sudden, living down in Honduras, I was seeing the evils of government and corruption and abuse of power, and started like really looking into more libertarian philosophies. And anyway, I started blogging about Honduran politics and the kind of mess it was. And some of those blogs got picked up by a website called the Pan Am Post that had a real libertarian spin to it. It's basically like a news and politics website with a libertarian slant, focused on Latin America. And so I started blogging for them, and then they offered me a full-time job to basically just like translate articles, write articles, edit articles, just be like a journalist for this website. And so I thought that was kind of a cooler, more unique opportunity than Peace Corps. You know, Peace Corps is 2 years. And at that point, I really didn't know. I didn't want to dedicate 2 years. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't think I want to commit for 2 years of my life to Dominican Republic. So I started after Costa Rica, dating this girl, I went back home and started working this job. Just worked from my mom's basement for a few weeks. I ended up visiting, traveling around visiting old teaching friends from Phoenix who are now in like law school and in business school, getting their MBAs, like visiting them, just kind of traveling around the U.S. doing this job. Me and this Costa Rican girl were still in contact. She eventually was like, hey, why don't you come down here and like move in with me for a couple months and do your job from down there. So I went back down to Costa Rica and lived with her for about a month or so, doing this job, writing for this website. And then there was a conference, basically like a student libertarian conference in Guatemala, and I was in Costa Rica. And so my boss was like, hey, you should, go to this conference and, cover it for the website. A bunch of, college young Latino libertarians meeting at this university in Guatemala, just having a conference. You should go cover this shit. So I was like, all right, I'll do it. I hopped on a bus, went up there to cover this conference, and funny story. That was the last time I ever saw that girl, man. We were dating. We didn't know like what was gonna become of our relationship. I loved her. She's an amazing human. Like wife. Like if I was the marriage type, if I was inclined to that, I think if I were some of my friends that I grew up with, I probably would have, and ended up proposing to that girl. She was amazing. Really cool chick. Anyway, last time I saw her, man, she drove me to this bus stop in Liberia is how you pronounce it. Liberia is how it'd be in English. Costa Rica, northeast Costa Rica. She drove me to the bus stop, and I assumed I would see her again. We didn't have an exact plan, but I assumed I'd see her again. And she dropped me off the bus, kissed her goodbye, and I took this bus from Costa Rica through, what's north of Costa Rica? Nicaragua, up through Honduras, all the way to Guatemala, like a couple of days on a bus. I had weed with me, of course. And I remember the bus got pulled out where, you have to cross all these borders. And dude, I'm so fucking reckless. I do so much stupid shit. I have so many stories like this. I'm just making dumb decisions. Bring all this weed with me, crossing international borders in Latin America, right? It's like, weed's like heroin in Latin America. It was the Nicaragua-Guatemala border, I think. Is that? No, that doesn't not Guatemala. Nicaragua-Honduras border? Anyway, something to do with Nicaragua. Either crossing from Costa Rica to Nicaragua or I think it was Nicaragua into Honduras. And, of course, our bus, every border you cross, even sometimes within borders, you get stopped by military checkpoints. And they go and they check our bus, and I have, not that much weed on me, but, enough weed to roll several joints or whatever. And so I went and threw the weed in a coffee pot in the back of the bus. There's a coffee pot in the back of the bus, and I went and threw a bag of weed in the coffee pot. And there was these two hippie musician guys, Costa Rican dudes next to me. Or maybe they're Colombian. Venezuelan, maybe, actually. I don't know. Anyway, these two Latino dudes next to me, hippie dudes with the guitars and flannels and ponchos, and clearly look like potheads, too. And one of these dudes had weed in his shoe. And they brought a drug-sniffing dog in the bus, and they bring this dude off the bus, and the dog is going nuts, like barking at this dude. I thought that dog's going to eat this guy. And the cop's like freaking out, making him go through all his shit. And then he has his guitar case, of course, and he pulls out the guitar case. And it's this incredible thing. He starts playing the military offers a song on the guitar. And they're all kind of like laughing and sing along. All of a sudden, like the mood really changes. And they let the dude back on. And he comes back on. He looks over at me. He's like, holy shit. And then he reaches down into the bus starts back off. We pull off. He reached down into his sock and he had a bag of weed in his sock. And I was like, oh my God. Anyway, we pull into wherever our next stop was. I think it was Guatemala City. It's not. Why do I keep saying Guatemala? I've been in Guatemala so many times on buses. But we didn't go into Guatemala. Oh no, we did. We had to go to Guatemala. That's where we were going. Sorry, I'm fucking been rambling now for over 2 hours. We're headed to Guatemala. So obviously, yes, we eventually made it to Guatemala. But eventually at some point we had to stop. I think it was actually in Managua that we stopped, the capital of Nicaragua. So I think we're crossing from Costa Rica into Nicaragua when we got our bus checked. And then by the time we got to Managua, we stopped in Managua to spend the night. And we stopped the bus, and the bus driver, we're all getting off the bus, and I totally forgot I put the weed in that coffee pot. And one of the bus attendants, or maybe it was the driver, was just like walking through the bus, cleaning shit up as we were like all getting off. And he finds his bag of weed, and he's like, "What is this?" Because we had just had our bus stopped and searched by drug sniffing dogs, and there's my bag of weed in the coffee pot, and I was like, "Holy shit, that's mine! I forgot I put it there." And then of course the hippie weed guy who had gotten pulled off the bus and almost arrested was like, "You smoke weed too?" Anyway, this is a fun story. We all ended up getting a hotel room together that night and just smoking weed all night together. And then the next morning we had to get right back on the bus and ended up going to Guatemala. And long story short, I went to this conference in Guatemala, amazing conference, and ended up meeting another girl. And this is, I'm not afraid to say it. Like I was not a good boyfriend. I was dating this other girl down in Costa Rica. Granted, we weren't like official or anything. We didn't have any long-term plans, and we lived in different countries, and I was leaving the country, and we hadn't made any plan for reuniting. But I think we definitely both assumed, we both loved each other, and we both assumed we were gonna get the band back together somehow at some point, and definitely stay in contact. Anyway, at this conference, I mean, this other girl, phenomenally amazing girl in her own right, ended up having I was at this conference for just a couple of days, but ended up hooking up with this girl. This girl I met, amazing girl, totally different personality, totally different girl. This girl's from Argentina and the other girl's from Costa Rica, two totally different personalities. But fell in love with this girl, like literally love at first sight type thing all over again with this other girl I met. And now this is like 2-3 days removed from saying goodbye to my previous girlfriend. Now I'm at this other girl, and we've now consummated this relationship in the fucking jungles of Guatemala. We took a trip off to this magical lake at the base of a volcano called Lake Atitlan. If you ever have a chance to go there in Guatemala, it's maybe the most magical place I've ever been. And that magic definitely manifested itself between me and this girl, with this kind of day trip we took during this conference to this place. Anyway, really fell in love with that girl. And I remember we did the conference, and a bunch of us had like an extra day. Like, hey, you want to go to this lake? I heard it's incredible. Let's get some mushrooms, take mushrooms, and just chill at this lake for like basically 36 hours. I was like, okay, I can do it. But I knew like I could basically go to this lake for 24 hours, and my flight was flying out of Guatemala City. I had to go to a buddy's wedding in Wichita, Kansas. So it was like Sunday the conference ended, and I was flying out of Guatemala City like Tuesday. And I think Sunday afternoon we all took this bus to this lake, and then you have to take this like tiny little boat across this amazing lake to get to this town where we stayed. We get a bunch of mushrooms, so we spend the Monday like taking mushrooms and smoking weed and just like exploring this lake. But I was also on deadline for an article I was supposed to have written about the conference I attended, the whole reason I was supposed to be at the conference. But at the conference I ended up just fraternizing, right? Just hanging out with all of these college students or recently graduated college kids, Latin American libertarians, and smoking weed and just hanging out and partying with them all conference, which, I have no regrets about. I think that was the best use of my time. But then all of a sudden, like my, boss, my editor is like, hey, where's that fucking article about the conference? I'm like, oh shit, that's right. So now I'm in the middle of this lake tripping on mushrooms with this new girl I've like fallen in love with all of a sudden, but I have to crank out this article for work, and I'm on psychedelics. And so anyway, I cranked out the fucking article, and then, spent these last 8 hours I had with this girl who I was like head over heels for all of a sudden. I remember like her and I hung out, and we fell asleep together in this bed, like on the shore of this lake, at the base of this Guatemalan volcano. And it was pouring rain, and I had an alarm that went off. Actually, she woke me up in the middle of the night, and I had to catch a bus in the middle of the night, like 3 a.m. I had to get on this bus. There's a 3 a.m. bus leaving back to Guatemala City. I needed to get on that bus to get to Guatemala City on time, to grab a taxi, to go to this airport in Guatemala so I could fly back to my buddy's wedding in Wichita, Kansas. So I remember her waking me up in the middle of the night, the weed and the mushroom haze, Pouring rain outside. I'm in the middle of this tiny little lakeside, volcano side town. I don't know what the fuck I am. It's not like I have Google Maps. It's pouring rain. I'm like, oh my God, I have to say goodbye to this girl all of a sudden. I feel like I have known this girl my whole life. So I remember just saying goodbye to her in the rain, and me just being like, I guess I'm just going to start running through the streets of this tiny town looking for a bus stop, and being like, this girl's going back to Argentina. I'm about to go to Wichita, Kansas. I have no plans of coming back. I just didn't. It was such a crazy time, and a lot of intense feelings. Then I had the girlfriend back in Costa Rica, and I'm working this job. It was just a really intense time, but fun. I look back on it fondly. But I remember just looking at this girl, being like, I met you 24 hours ago. You're going back to Argentina. I'm going back to the United States. But I have no doubt in my mind I'm going to see you again soon. And that's what happened. I went back to the United States. I kept working that job for the next few months. I ended up quitting right around the end of 2014 and just deciding I'm just going to take some time off and travel. And so 2014 turns to 2015. I quit the job right around December, November, right on Thanksgiving, Christmas, in between that time. Went back home to Atlanta, get all my shit together, and then me and this girl that I met at this conference in the middle of the fucking jungle in Guatemala, she planned a trip to come up to the U.S. from Argentina, and her and I, we had known each other for 24 fucking hours, at least on my part, totally intoxicated, and we just agreed, she's going to fly up, and we're just going to travel around the East Coast for 2 weeks, and so she flew up and traveled around the East Coast for 2 weeks, and we fell in love with each other on that trip, man. At that time, though, I had made the decision to come off the Prozac again. So I was like, I'm going to come off the Prozac again. I'm going to get rid of all my professional responsibilities, and I'm just going to vagabond through Latin America, and that'll just give me a few months to live life off Prozac and kind of recalibrate and figure out some next steps. So me and this girl do this trip up and down the East Coast for a couple weeks in January, February of 2015 now at this point. She goes back to Argentina. I just pack my bag up, fly to Phoenix to go visit my old elementary school students that I had taught for those 3 years in Phoenix, to visit and catch up with some of them for a week. And then from there, I just hopped on buses and started traveling down through Mexico, Latin America. My first vagabond trip. Shit I still want to do in the future. And so that's what I did. I went from Phoenix, took a bus from Phoenix to San Diego, hung out in San Diego for a few days. From San Diego, across the border. Actually, I just walked across the border into Tijuana. Hung out in Tijuana for a couple days. From Tijuana, hopped on a bus and just traveled through Baja California. From Baja California, took a boat across wherever the Sea of Cortez. From Baja California, which is Mexico, to cross into mainland Mexico. Met some people, drove through, hitched a ride with them through Mexico, some towns in Mexico, Guadalajara, Guanajuato, made it to Mexico City, ended up crashing with those same people I had caught a ride with for a week or so. Mexico City, vagabond through Mexico, saw a bunch of ruins. But at the time, I could feel my mental state start slipping, man. At the time, all of a sudden, my computer was shutting down again. It felt like my computer had a virus again. The gears were grinding. There wasn't any fuel in my brain. No more serotonin. No more Prozac. I could feel my shit slipping. It was scary. But I was like, let's keep this bitch rolling. Kept vagabonding down in, I guess, right at the border of Guatemala and Mexico. Someone stole my phone, which is an inconvenience, but not the end of the world. But it definitely kind of fucks you up when you're in the middle of Mexico, Guatemala, and you get your shit stolen, and your phone is kind of your lifeline for communication with other people and maps and shit. Not to mention the monetary value of it. So that kind of threw me off, but it was cool. Let's keep it rolling. Crossed from Mexico into Guatemala illegally. I just asked around as I was in southern Mexico visiting these ruins. I forget the name of the ruins, but they're anyway, I don't remember the exact name of the ruin. Chichen Itza, I think maybe it was. Where was that? Chichen Itza, I believe I was. And I was like, okay, what's the cheapest way? Trying to do it on a budget. How do you cross what's the cheapest way to Guatemala? Ask the locals. They tell me this is the cheapest way into Guatemala, and I end up crossing to Guatemala with a bunch of illegal immigrants, anyway, basically, I took this kind of shady little van through southern Mexico to the Guatemalan border. When we got to the border was basically this river, And I'm used to crossing borders, and I know if you go through the standard procedures, like you see even in like the I shouldn't say shittiest, but yeah, shittiest, the least developed countries, Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, even there's formal border checkpoints and border agents who are checking your passport and stamping your passport and having you fill out forms and shit. And all of a sudden, this van just parks at a river, and I get on this little boat. And just cross the river on this little boat, like this little motorboat with like 10 other Guatemalans, Mexicans. I don't know what exactly their nationality was. I know one guy was Honduran. One guy lived in San Pedro Sula, the town that I worked in and lived near. He became like my buddy on the van, and I kept kind of asking him questions like, what are we doing here? Get on a boat? Like, so we crossed the river from Mexico into Guatemala, and all of a sudden we're into Guatemala, and we had crossed illegally. All of these people were trying to avoid the checkpoints as well. And so then that night, like we just get literally on the other side of the river. So Mexico's on one side of the river, Guatemala's on the other side of the river. I'm just kicking it with this Honduran guy who's trying to make it back to I think he was trying to immigrate illegally to the United States and got caught in Mexico, but like escaped the border agents and was going to go back, but lost his money or something and was trying to make it back to Honduras. To like, I guess like to get some more funds or something. I don't remember exactly why he was attempting to go to the United States and got caught up and had to head backwards. And so he was trying to do so illegally because he crossed all those borders illegally. So I got to go back illegally to avoid any questioning. So I was with these folks. All of a sudden I was an illegal immigrant, right? Very unique experience. As Americans, we're used to all these Mexican and Central American illegal immigrants flooding our borders. All of a sudden I was the American going the opposite direction illegally. Which is kind of a cool experience. Anyway, we're on this border town and we're staying in like basically this like barn for illegal immigrants. So we cross the river. He's like, hey, yeah, I know a good place to crash for cheap. It's like literally like $1. But we were living in we stayed in like a stable. We stayed in like an illegal immigrant stable. It was just like a stable, really. So like a shelter with stalls, and on stalls, like just these dirty, twin mattresses on the floor, just filthy, no sheets, just a mattress covered in dirt and God knows what kind of bugs, disease. And that's where we stayed, man. We stayed in this dirty fucking stall, him and I barely knew this dude. And I remember we went out and found a drug dealer. I grabbed some weed and he got cocaine. I'm not a big cocaine guy unless it's like a really special celebration with a big party. But I remember this dude, he had some friends in the town and they started drinking and doing coke, and I'm smoking weed on the sidelines, which are two very different experiences. And I remember that getting kind of weird, where like everyone was getting super hyped up on coke. And maybe I was just paranoid with the weed, but all of a sudden I became very palpable that I was with a bunch of illegal immigrant drug dealers. And I remember thinking like, I don't know these people really. And I'm staying in this illegal immigrant stable. And it's nothing to do with the illegal immigrants, right? Illegal immigrants, it's such a ridiculous term to me. I don't believe in borders at all. I think anyone should be allowed to move to any country without any sort of formal immigration at all. We're all born in this world. I think we're all entitled to live wherever the fuck we want. So don't take me the wrong way when I say illegal immigrants. I don't mean that. I meant I was with criminals. I was with drug dealers who were involved in human trafficking, essentially, right? And they're all doing cocaine and drinking booze. And I realized like, oh, I'm the guy with like the MacBook and the wallet full of cash. And anyway, nothing happened, but the vibe changed significantly. And it was one of the few, I've put myself in some very fucking sketchy situations, and I enjoy being in sketchy situations. But it was one of the few times where I got a bad vibe, like, ooh, you might have got yourself into something here. And I remember kind of being like calling it an early night and headed back to my little stall earlier than the rest because I could feel the energy shifting. And that always happens with cocaine. But this was cocaine and copious amounts of alcohol and criminals. And I don't care if you're a fucking criminal either. Honestly, if you're, to a degree, right? I believe, once again, I believe all drugs should be legal, right? So if you're dealing cocaine, certainly it's not the greatest profession in the world, but if there's a market for it and you're filling the market, obviously cocaine is a harmful drug. So anyway, my point is, just because you're committing criminal activity doesn't make me inherently think you're bad, but Anyway, I just got a bad vibe from the whole situation. Rambling there, sorry. Anyway, at that point, I was legal immigrant in Guatemala. So me and this dude took a bus to like our next checkpoint in Guatemala the next morning. We said our goodbyes. And then I kept just kind of vagabonding through Guatemala. Met a real cool Israeli girl and had like a fling with her in Guatemala for a couple weeks. And then I went to Guatemala City, though, and stayed at this old hostel. Actually, the hostel I was staying at when I went to the conference the year or several months prior. Got my wallet stolen in Guatemala, so now my wallet was gone. My phone had gotten stolen and my wallet got stolen. So shit was kind of getting a little more difficult to travel. I didn't have any money, so I had to like start Western Unioning myself money. Right? Didn't have a debit card, didn't have an ID. So I would just go online to Western Union and send money from myself, Western Union myself money, and then go to a Western Union location in Guatemala and withdraw cash. And that's how I was surviving. And at the time, my mental state started to slip a little more. Once again, I wasn't getting depressed, but it felt like my brain just wasn't working properly. My buddy Sam was dating his same Honduran girlfriend at the time, and he was actually visiting her. So him and I, my next stop was Mexico to Guatemala. Then met up with Sam and his girlfriend in Honduras. Spent like a week with them in Honduras. And at that point, I had really started to feel my mental state slip. And granted, we went out to this island in the Caribbean called Utila, where we used to like to go party when we lived in Honduras. And so we spent a weekend there partying, and I partied hard that weekend. And I think that fucked up my brain a little bit too. Kind of sent me over the edge. And my goal was, at the very least, to vagabond all the way through Mexico, Central America, cross over the Panama Canal into South America, and make it down to Ecuador, where my sister Morgan was working for the United Nations in Quito, Ecuador, at the time. Made it down to Honduras, and I realized I needed to expedite this process. I wasn't going to be able to make it just vagabonding bus by bus for the next several months. I kind of just needed to hop down. I needed a sense of stability, a place to stay, and really someone I knew and loved. Like vagabonding like that it's a lonely process. It's an incredibly beneficial process, incredibly introspective process, but it's a lonely process, man. Just hopping on buses in third world countries, knowing no one, staying in fucking illegal immigrant stables. Like, you're by yourself a lot. And there's no creature comforts, obviously. There's no internet access. At that point, I'm getting my possessions stolen. I was still enjoying the thrill of it all, but I was also feeling my mental state slipping. I was fully off the Prozac at the time, and I could feel my brain being sucked dry of like brain juice or whatever. So I ended up, it's so stupid. I don't know why I did this at the time, but I was in Honduras and bought a ticket to Quito, Ecuador to go visit my sister and skip over Costa Rica and Panama and Nicaragua. Really skip over Nicaragua and Panama. I'd spent plenty of time in Costa Rica. I knew Costa Rica. But I remember being like, fuck, I just got to sacrifice Nicaragua and Panama on this trip because I just don't have it in me to make it that far to Ecuador. But I bought a plane ticket that flew out of Costa Rica. Like, this is where my thinking was at the time. I just wasn't thinking correctly. I was in Honduras and bought a ticket to fly to Ecuador that left from Costa Rica. So I had to, once I wrapped up my week of fun with Sam and his girlfriend, I had to take a bus from Honduras through half of Honduras, through all of Nicaragua, through almost all of Costa Rica to get down to San Jose, the capital of Costa Rica, to fly out of San Jose, which had a layover in El Salvador, which is the opposite direction. El Salvador's back up towards Mexico. So it's like I took this bus multiple days headed south in the direction of Ecuador, not flying out of Honduras, flying out of fucking Costa Rica. And the plane in Costa Rica flew backwards, back even further up to El Salvador, had a layover in El Salvador. Only time I've been to El Salvador, actually. I had like a 10-hour layover, and I wanted to work out really bad when I landed there. I didn't want to hang out in the airport forever, so I left. I snuck out of the El Salvador airport, because if you leave and come back in, you have to pay. You have to pay like $70. And so I snuck out of the airport, hopped in the pickup truck of a bunch of like people that worked on the tarmac. Like, I snuck out of the airport through like a back door, and I was in like an employee area, and there were a bunch of bros who were, worked on the tarmac of the San Salvador airport, loading in a truck, leaving work. And I was like, hey, can I hop in the truck with you guys and take me in the town? I don't know where the fuck I was going. And so they're like, yeah, sure. Where are you going? I'm like, I don't know. Well, is there a gym? And so they're like, yeah, there's a hotel that might have a gym. So they just drive me on this highway towards San Salvador, and we pass like a fucking Holiday Inn, and they're like, yeah, there's like this Holiday Inn is basically like a military barracks. Like the U.S. Air Force uses this. This is where the U.S. Air Force that's working at the El Salvador airport, all the military men stay at this base or at this Holiday Inn. It's basically like the military barracks. So I was like, all right, I'll go there. So I just walked in this Holiday Inn and pretended like I was a Air Force guy and used their gym and fucking used their pool and took a shower. It's fucking crazy shit I do on the road. And then hopped right back and then took the bus from, the shuttle from the Holiday Inn back to the airport and then snuck back into the airport through the back door. And then from there, flew down to Quito, Ecuador. Flew down to Quito, Ecuador, spent the week with my sister, and there I could really feel my fucking mind slipping bad. I was in a bad spot. I knew I needed to make some kind of change. But I really wanted to make it all the way down to Argentina. But I was just like, dude, I feel like I'm losing my mind. I don't know if I can do this. And so I decided I was going to go to a yoga training for like 2 weeks. Just to kind of get my mind right on the coast of Ecuador. Take a step back, not worry about making progress on my travels. Just take a step back, meditate, and do yoga for a couple weeks. And so I took a bus from Quito, Ecuador, through the night to Montañita, Ecuador, on the coast. It was a 2-legged journey. You went from Quito, drove through the mountains, and you stopped at this little town in the middle of nowhere. You changed buses, and then from there went down to the coast. On that first leg of the journey, I fell asleep from Quito to the middle of nowhere. I fell asleep, and when I woke up, everything had been stolen. Everything. So prior to that, in Mexico, I'd had my phone stolen. Then in Guatemala, I had my wallet stolen. So I had still with me my passport, my clothes, my laptop, my camera, my Kindle, things to survive with. When I woke up in the middle of Ecuador, in the middle of nowhere, I had my passport. Other than that, I had nothing. For whatever reason, I had my passport in my pocket. I never carried my passport in my pocket. I always carried it in like the secret compartment of my backpack. Thank God I didn't do that. But at that point, everything was gone. All of my clothes, everything. I had a backpack, this big, like 70-liter Osprey travel bag, vagabond backpacker bag. Gone. Everything. The only possession I have was a shirt and shorts, underwear, shoes and socks, and my passport. Literally. 4 a.m. in the middle of Ecuador. I'm already feeling like I'm losing my mind. I'm just like, there's no way this is fucking happening. There's one other couple on the bus, a Canadian couple. They gave me a $10 bill. So I could take, at that point, I was like, am I going back to Quito or am I going to continue with this yoga trip? And it's like, you're having to make a major life decision in the middle of nowhere, right after shit has gotten stolen, in the middle of the night with a malfunctioning brain. I was like, I should just keep going to the yoga training. So I kept going to the yoga training, with that $10 bills, made it to the yoga training, explained to like the host of the yoga training what had happened. She let me just crash. Like, no, that's not true at all. She let me crash one night at like the yoga studio. I agreed to do the yoga training, met another really cool girl there actually, and started like a little few day fling with this beautiful girl from the Galapagos, who was doing my yoga train with me. Ah, man, she was awesome. She was beautiful. And it was just a cool experience. It was like a nice respite. I'm at this yoga training. I meet this girl the first day. We ended up, having this fling for the first few days. And she knew people in the town, so she got me hooked up with a friend of hers who owned a hotel, who gave me like a real cheap room at a nice hotel, a relatively nice hotel, where her and I crashed for a couple nights. And we started doing the yoga training together. But during those first the nights in that hotel, I kept getting destroyed by mosquitoes. Destroyed, eaten all night. I didn't sleep all night long. Mosquitoes by me all night. And within a couple of days, I got really fucking sick. Really sick. Like the worst fever I've ever had, and my joints locked up. And I'd gotten chikungunya. Chikungunya, which is a mosquito-borne virus, incurable mosquito-borne virus. That was big deal at the time down there. Zika is the latest of those. Zika was big in the news in the last couple of years. Dengue fever, I got in Honduras, also mosquito-borne virus. It's like getting mono. Chikungunya was much like dengue fever, also mosquito-borne. Feels like you have mono, plus your joints lock up. And then Zika, as best I know, doesn't have. I've never had, but from what I understand, the symptoms are similar to dengue and chikungunya. But then the big thing with Zika is the effect it has on fetuses. You see these babies born with shrunken heads. Anyway, I got chikungunya, had all my shit stolen. I feel like I was losing my mind. So at that point, I threw in the towel. And once again, stupid fucking decision. I guess trying to save like $50. I didn't. I was like, I need to go home. I have no possessions. I have no money. My brain is imploding on itself. And now I am incapacitated by this incurable virus I've gotten from these mosquitoes. It's probably time for me to, wrap up this little journey and, live to fight another day. So I bought a ticket home to fly home to my mom's place in Atlanta, but I bought it out of Bogota, Colombia. Once again, what the fuck? So I had to take a bus. This is the longest 3 days of my life. I had to take a bus from the coast of Ecuador through essentially the entirety of Ecuador, through half of Colombia, up to Bogota, Colombia. And I was in some of the worst physical shape of my life. I was covered from head to toe in this red rash. I was just shaking uncontrollably the entire trip. I could barely stand up because every time you'd move, it felt like your joints were about to snap in half. And I was with all these like Venezuelan and Colombian, Ecuadorian grandmas on this bus. And they all knew exactly, this disease had been ravaging their communities. So they knew exactly what the fuck is up. So by the time we pull into the bus station in Bogota, Colombia, they had been alerted. And it was a big deal. Like they were quarantining people, it's like COVID now, They were really trying to isolate and quarantine this virus. And so by the time I pulled in to Bogota, Colombia, I was greeted with like a team of nurses and like public health officials, got on my bus and took me to this clinic in the Bogota bus station. And we're basically like, hey, we're going to take you to this government hospital and quarantine you for a few days. Like you can't leave. So I was like, all right, sure, guys, sure thing. Let's go to the fucking government hospital, but let me take a piss real quick. And so I told them I need to go to the bathroom. I'm in like this clinic in the back of the fucking bus station. Like, hey, let me go to the bathroom. Like, okay, go use the bathroom, and then you need to come with us to the hospital. And I just ran out of the bus station. I just ran straight out of the fucking bus station, got in a taxi. And I just told him to drive away from the bus station and park. And no, I had him take me to an internet cafe. And the internet cafe, I booked like a quick hotel room. I was flying out that next day. So I was like, I just need to like fly avoid the health officials, for like 12 hours until I get on this plane. So he drove me to I booked a hotel on the internet, stayed at the hotel for like 8 hours. And the next morning hopped in another taxi, actually a train, I think. And made it out, flew out of the country. And I was like the 101st case of chikungunya in the United States or something like that. And from that point, I got back to the United States and I was devastated, dude. Psychologically, I was devastated. I recovered at my mom's house physically for the next couple weeks, but I had no idea what I was going to do next. I expected to still be traveling. Now I was like, all of a sudden I was back in the United States, back in the real world. I needed to make some adult decision about what my next step professionally or personally, anything with my life was. I was recovering from this illness, and then my brain, I was off the Prozac. My brain was imploding on itself. I went through a real rough period there at my mom's house for about a month. I had no idea what the fuck I was going to do. And once again, I don't know how this fucking happened. This is like buying the plane tickets, like being in one country and buying a plane ticket to fly out of another country. I just decided out of nowhere I was just going to go back to Arizona and teach. It's like all I knew to do. My like teaching mentor, like basically my drill sergeant at teaching boot camp from when I first graduated college. At that point, she had started an organization that was basically designed to keep like Teacher America and Teaching Fellows people in the profession. So instead of like all of these Teacher America kids doing Teacher America for 2 years, then going off to law school, she had designed this nonprofit that was like focused, called the Teacher Retention Project. I don't think it exists anymore. Maybe it does. Anyway, it was designed to like work with teachers and match them with struggling schools, and basically, I guess, kind of work out like an alternative arrangement, alternative contract with the schools. So mostly charter schools who have more flexibility to do this kind of thing, like kind of customize a teaching contract, just to make the teaching profession more palatable, I guess, for teachers that are highly needed in these areas. And so I went and taught at a high school for the first time, a really rough charter high school in Phoenix, man. That was rough. And at the time I was scrambling to get my brain back together, and I went through a really dark period there where for the closest I ever got to killing myself. Truly the closest I ever got to killing myself. And really, once again, it's not the OCD that came back. And like, once again, it wasn't like I couldn't dress myself or I was checking the locks all day long. It was, my brain was like, it just felt like my brain was imploding. Like my brain wouldn't work. Like my brain didn't have enough gas. Like my brain had like I said, the analogy I drew before, like my brain had a computer virus, and I just couldn't think clearly. I couldn't maintain consistency of thought. My thoughts were racing constantly. Just felt like my brain was like eating itself, basically, and was dry. That's the best way I can describe it. Like your brain is dry. It's like your body feels dehydrated and like you can't move. You don't have any energy. It's like how my brain felt. Like my brain had been sucked dry of its fuel. And I didn't know what to do about it. And I can remember this is the only time of like taking tangible steps with like an actual tool or apparatus to cause myself harm. I remember taking a razor blade. I had a box cutter in my apartment, to open boxes, I suppose. I don't remember purchasing it for self-harm, but I remember taking the razor blade out of that box cutter and just like lightly cutting my wrist. Just like kind of seeing like, okay, this is how it'd be done. So if I really wanted to do this, just kind of going through a trial run, like, someone in the on deck circle taking a couple swings of the bat just to, get the mechanics down, it's just like lightly dragging this razor blade across my wrist, like just kind of getting it down. Like, okay, if I'm going to do this, let's do this right. Let's get a deep cut. Okay, this is where I'll cut. This is how I'll cut. What's the right pressure amount? The first time I've ever like taken, put pen to paper, so to speak, in terms of self-harm. Yeah, bad. Dark time in my life. Teaching wise though, it was, I felt like I was having a really positive impact. It was a really fucking rough school, riddled by gangs. Once again, it was an alternative school. All kids that had been kicked out of their school, not necessarily for behavior, but also kids that had been kicked out of their school either for behavior or for academics. And so ours was an alternative school. It was like a last chance school for these kids that basically it was like a diploma factory, which I supported. Like, get these kids a diploma, get the curriculum done in as efficient and like surface level as possible, and just get these kids a fucking GED and a diploma so they can get on with their lives. And that's what it was. But riddled by gangs, man. This was, I had a student get shot at that school. I can remember I was in my, it was during my planning period towards the end of the day. And, I just hear pop, 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 pop. And at that point, living down in Honduras, I was very familiar with that sound. So I immediately knew it was up, and I ran out into the hall to see what was up. I thought the shooting was coming from inside the school. And in fact, the shooting had come from right outside the front door of the school. And I see a student of mine. I didn't teach this kid, but I was running an after school, like fitness program after school. So this kid would come in, drunk actually a lot into my little weight room I was running. He would come in drunk, wouldn't work out, just kind of sit and watch me work out with the other kids. Native American kid. And I saw him just stumble into the doors, just bleeding out of his side, like holding his gut, basically bleeding out of his gut. So I just ran over to him. All the other teachers kind of ran into their classrooms and locked their doors and locked their kids in the classroom. And the principal was running around locking all the doors to the school. And this kid was just slumped over on this like couch in the lobby of the school. So I just ran to him and grabbed some scissors from the secretary and cut his shirt off and grabbed a bunch of, some towels appeared out of nowhere, and just plugged his bullet wounds there for like several minutes. I feel like an eternity until the paramedics showed up. Yeah, that was a fucking crazy time. Yeah, I didn't know. The kid wasn't moving. I didn't know if he's going to die. I didn't, I had a little bit of experience with gunshot wounds before, and I didn't tell this story, but, a friend of mine in Honduras got shot, much worse actually than this case. Fortunately, this kid, the student in Phoenix, they were in the stomach. I knew bullet wounds in the stomach it's not great. But it was more towards like right under his rib cage. Once I got pressure on the wounds, the blood really started, he was covered in blood. We were both covered in blood within the first couple minutes, but the blood really, once I started putting pressure on it, the blood flow slowed, and he wasn't it wasn't like he got his color back or anything, but he was still with it. And by the time the paramedics arrived and they took over from me, they seemed confident that he was going to be fine, and he ended up being fine. He was actually back at school within a month. My friend that got shot in Honduras, dude, me and my sister living in Honduras down at the time, we met this dude in the mall. We were just talking English at a mall in Honduras, and this dude was in front of us on the escalator, and he turns around, he was Honduran. He's like, "Oh, you guys from America?" Obviously. And he had an American accent. I think both his parents were Honduran, but he grew up in Dallas. And he was back teaching too. He moved back to Honduras to be a teacher. He was just teaching like teaching like art. Just a real cool artist dude. Didn't know the guy very well. Actually, the only time I met him in person was at the mall. He ended up just hanging out with me and my sister and walking around the mall for a couple hours and shooting the shit. We exchanged contact information, and we stayed in touch through like WhatsApp and Facebook over the next several weeks. And we had planned to. I was going to go up and visit him he lived in Puerto Cortez, so like on the coast, on the Caribbean coast. I was going to go up and visit him for a weekend and just hang out with him for the weekend in Puerto Cortez. And literally the night so on a Friday night, I finished work and I took a bus to San Pedro Sula, where my sister lived. And I was going to crash at her place, and the next morning I was going to take a bus up to Puerto Cortez. And so I crashed at my sister's place at night, and woke up in the morning. And I had a Facebook message from one of his friends, another teacher, who I don't know how she got my contact information. Anyway, she was like, yeah, Joe got shot last night. And they had like some function for teachers at the school when he was walking. Like literally, his school's on one side of the street. His house that he's staying at was on the other side of the street. He walked out of the school to his house. There's, gang members or, there's just all kinds of criminals in Honduras. Everyone's, it's a failed state, so young people turn to crime very quickly. Anyway, so this kid with a gun had been waiting for a teacher to leave the school and pulls a gun on him right at his front door of his house, and asks for his phone. And it's the number one thing you do in Honduras or any violent country like that is you just do what is asked of you when you have a gun in your face. And he didn't, and they shot him in the head, in the chest, and in the stomach, like the three worst places you can get shot. He lost his eye. And he is in a coma, real rough shape. He ended up surviving. He's still alive to this day. But that was a whole fucking mess, dude. I ended up going up to where he lived anyway. And not to like make myself sound like a cowboy. It's just the truth of what happened is in Honduras, the police are right in cahoots with the criminals. So I knew no one was going to be investigating this shit. So I went and met with the head of police of the city, of the town, made him investigate. Actually went on a police raid. It's Honduras, dude. It's like, being a white guy in Latin America, man, you can pull a lot of crazy shit without a lot of questions asked. So like, they gave me a shotgun and a bulletproof vest. I'm not making this shit up, dude. I went up like, what the fuck are you guys doing to investigate this stuff? Meeting with the chief of police. Of course, they're doing nothing. But because I was putting pressure on them, like, oh yeah, we got a raid organized tomorrow. You can come with us. And so the next thing you know, I meet up with the police at the headquarters the next day, and they give me a shotgun and a bulletproof vest to go on this police raid of a suspected house where they thought the guy who shot my friend lived. And granted, I wasn't like kicking down doors. I was in a patrol vehicle, like surrounding the area, and we were just like circling. But like, I was literally instructed, like, hey, put on this vest and like hold the gun this way and point it out the window this way. And like, if I tell you to shoot, shoot. Like, what the fuck are we doing? Like, straight up, this stuff happened. We never ended up finding anyone. Ended up working with the U.S. Embassy and the U.S. Ambassador at the time. Did fucking nothing. I was in like talks with them for weeks over trying to investigate this, and then eventually trying to get him airlifted out of the United States back to Dallas and the U.S. Embassy. Fuck government, dude. I mean, they did nothing. It's like, what is an embassy for if not an attempted murder of a U.S. citizen on foreign soil? Like, what is a U.S. embassy for other than helping facilitate that situation? They did fucking nothing. Ugh. Anyway, I ended up eventually getting this dude flown home back to his hometown of Dallas, and ended up visiting him in the hospital at the time when he was still in a coma. And quite frankly, I haven't really talked to the guy much since then. Since I should get in contact with him and see how he's doing, but I think he still suffers from. Well, certainly he lost his eye, and I think he suffers from brain damage as well, from what I understand. But maybe I'm wrong. I should get in touch with them to find out. It was, anyway, brutal situation. Anyway, teaching back in Phoenix, second time I dealt with gunshot wounds was this kid, but he turned out all right. And but I guess that, I felt fine. And those kind of crisis situations, I don't think that had any negative impact on my psychological demise at that point. At that point, we're talking early 2016. Honestly, in those crisis situations, I've been in other situations in Honduras where there's been gunfire. I remember another time where there was gunfire at a club where my sister was. And, I honestly experienced like a sense of tranquility and calmness in those situations. When there's bullets flying and stuff like that, once again, I'm not trying to make myself sound like some fucking hero, but I genuinely, my experience is when there are bullets flying, this overwhelming sense of calmness comes over me, and I feel this attraction to run towards the bullets. Maybe that's like just brain damage. Maybe my brain is literally broken so much to the point that like it's reacting incorrectly in crisis situations, or maybe, there's certain sections of the population where like that's the case. That's certainly the case with me, dude. When shit's hitting the fan like that, I get a sense of calmness and actually like a sense of excitement. So I don't think like having that student being shot and me kind of being there for the whole thing had any negative effect on me psychologically. I really don't. If anything, it had a positive effect. It like enlivened me. But anyway, I was not doing well. This is around my 2016, so 28th birthday, right? Yeah, 28th birthday. I remember my 28th birthday was right on the darkest period of my life. And so I'd gone back to see a psychiatrist in Phoenix, and that psychiatrist put me back on Prozac, double the initial dosage I had been successful on previous, and on Adderall, which is entirely asinine. And really really fucking malpractice, because I started taking the Adderall again, and it just exacerbated everything I was experiencing. And the next thing I knew, within a couple of days of being back on the Adderall, I was like driving my car a zillion miles an hour in like a 50 mile an hour zone and trying to take a turn at like high speeds without touching the brake, just not thinking, just manic, dude. My mom's even suggested that it was like unintentional suicide. But anyway, I got in this really bad, fortunately, one car accident where I was just like driving recklessly and frustratedly and just not thinking. And basically like a turn was coming up and I like just turned. I was going like, 60 miles an hour in a 40 mile an hour zone. And I'm like right on top of this turn and I just turned without touching the brakes. It shouldn't turn. And my car just like hydroplaned and flew over this like ledge and crashed into this concrete wall. And I totaled my car and like my pinky was hanging off. Fortunately, that was the only injury. Fortunately, there's no one else involved more than anything. And it was just me. And the only injury to me was like my pinky was like kind of half detached from my hand. And called an Uber and went to the fucking emergency room and had them sew it back on. And honestly, after that, it kind of shook me up. It woke me back up. And the Argentinian girl that I'd fallen in love with in Guatemala at the time, she'd gotten a visa to live in the United States, and she'd moved to DC at the time, and she kind of saved me a little bit. She flew out we had been kind of touch, but we kind of I broke things off, even like long distance, when my psychological state slipped, because I just did not want to drag her into that. But she knew something was up, and she called me up one day. I was like, I know you're not right. And she ended up flying out there, and she kind of saved me. Both the car accident, the gunshot, and her flying out there really kind of lifted my sails, and I got back on the Prozac and shit was cool after that. Let me try to kind of wrap up this stuff and kind of close this thing out and get you to the point where I am now in life. From there, her and I started dating. I moved back to Atlanta. Actually, from there, that summer after that year teaching, I finally did my yoga training. I'd been doing yoga throughout my entire adult life, really since the back injury. Actually, really, I started doing yoga when I tried to play football to increase my flexibility. But then real hardcore in Honduras, when I didn't have access to like any formal gyms, started doing yoga, learning yoga on YouTube, and got pretty good at yoga. And then really became an integral part of my life, and took a yoga training summer of 2016 in DC, which gave me a chance to like really live and be with that girl for the first time ever during that yoga training. And from there, I was like, I think I'm going to dedicate my life full time to yoga. And so I started like a little yoga business. I moved back home to Atlanta, moved into my mom's basement, and I was like, I'm going to start like a little yoga business, Youngblood Yoga. And I started running little yoga workshops and stuff. And then my grandmother's friend's grandson was essentially like a juvenile delinquent. And his grandparents came to me with an offer, with a really handsome offer to basically be like this kid's mentor, I guess, and help them navigate the whole world of special education. He was getting out of like juvenile detention and was trying to integrate back into regular 8th grade. And so they basically hired me on to like help them do that process. And so I started doing less and less of the yoga and more ended up working full time with this kid for several months through the 16, 17 school year in Atlanta. And working with that kid, ended up abandoning the yoga stuff altogether. And then during that year was kind of a trial run with me and this girl. She was living in DC. I was living in Atlanta, and we would, visit each other basically every other weekend. One of us would fly to either city. And so then it was kind of shit or get off the pot time with her. And so I ended up moving up to DC, and during the 17-18 school year worked as a PE teacher at DC International School, the coolest school, nicest school, most well-run school I've ever worked at, but way too hippy-dippy, liberal. It was like a liberal social justice warrior training camp. This fucking school was way too much for me, like way too much political messaging and way too touchy-feely, like hugs and kisses. And like, it was a really cool school because we would have like ambassadors kids. We would have, kids who were, who came from awesome homes of DC professionals. And then we'd have kids that came from horrible families, and we'd have illegal immigrants. It was a great mix of all kinds of students, which just really made that school amazing. But we had rough kids, and we needed a discipline system in the school to address the issues that we're seeing. We're having real behavior issues, and I know real behavior issues, and there's just no discipline system in place to like manage the misbehavior, and I just can't deal with that shit, man. I mean, I'm much more law and order when it comes to child rearing than I am in real life. I'm very anti-law enforcement in a lot of ways, and believe we really need to get rid of really all laws, except unless you're causing direct harm to someone else. But I believe in legalization of all drugs, prostitution, gambling, all that shit. I think you should be allowed to do whatever the fuck you want as long as you're not hurting anyone. But when it comes to raising children, I think we need to be much more hardcore. And anyway, I felt like we were treating, a bunch of 12-year-olds like they were, doctoral students. Anyway, I did not like it. And that was my last year teaching. And I did not like teaching PE, which, once again, there wasn't a lot of structure. And don't get me wrong, dude, I didn't do a good job with this. I threw in the towel pretty early on. I'm not proud at all of my performance as an educator during that school year. Really not. That was bad. That 17-18 school year is what led me ultimately to this podcast, right? I'd always thought about doing this podcast. I thought about going on like an interview tour. And that 17-18 school year, it was just like kind of my last attempt to be a teacher. And I thought maybe PE, I would enjoy it more. And I'm more of a law and order drill sergeant kind of guy. And PE is the least structured of all of the avenues of being a teacher, right? So it was just total fucking chaos. And once again, most of this is my fault. My effort level was low. I'd thrown in the towel early in that school year. I knew I didn't want to be in a relationship. I knew I didn't want to be a teacher. It felt like I was forcing a lifestyle and a life path that I knew really wasn't designed for me. I'm a crazy person. I'm a hunter-gatherer. I'm a vagabonder. I love that girl to death, but I knew I didn't want to be in a relationship. And I was immature. I was resentful. I was smoking weed constantly. Every night I was smoking weed, which granted during quarantine, I smoke weed every night too. But, I kind of give myself the excuse of quarantine as weed is my one escape. At this point, like I had all these friends in town. I had a beautiful girlfriend. The job I had plenty of reservations with, but I had a perfectly fine job. There's no reason for me to not have lived a very happy, cool life as a 29, 30-year-old in Washington, D.C. at the time. But I just didn't perform well at all. And so by the time that school year, I was like, I need a reset. I need to do what I actually want to do with my life. And so that's when I went on the podcast interview tour. I wrapped up that school year, packed up my apartment in DC, and I flew to Chicago to visit my sister and nieces. And then from there, I went down to Louisiana to see my dad, who I hadn't seen in years and really did not know, still don't really know who that guy is. Interviewed him, interviewed my half-brother and sister on that side, and just started traveling throughout the United States, visiting family and friends. And those are the first 25 podcast episodes that I posted. And then after that tour in the winter of 2019, winter of 2018, going into 2019, I think it was December 11th, 2018, my buddy Sam and I, my Central American counterpart, flew down to Panama for 2 weeks. And I basically picked up my vagabond journey from where it ended last time, where the mosquitoes and the robberies and the psychological distress that ended it in Ecuador. I had skipped over Nicaragua and I had skipped over Panama. And so we decided we were going to go to Panama. We got a flight down to Panama. He stayed for 2 weeks. He wasn't vagabonding. He was just working from Panama. We did 2 weeks of Panama, and from there, I went from Panama down into Colombia, traveled through Colombia, down into I scooped over Ecuador because I've been to Ecuador, traveled through Peru, and then to Bolivia, just right in Lago Titicaca, which is a giant, I think it's the highest lake in the world, maybe? Highest elevation lake in the world. Anyway, it is shared by both Peru and Bolivia. So that's as far as I made it into Bolivia. So another vagabond trip. That trip from December to, I guess, March. December 2018 through March 2019. Just vagabonding. Same thing, no clear direction. This trip was much more social, much more reflective. Trying to think highlights of that trip. Another marijuana running with the law, man. I was in Cali, Colombia, right? I was in Cali. Yeah, Cali, Colombia, staying at Airbnb, and the owners of the Airbnb was this lesbian couple, or one of their moms owned the house I was staying in, and they were around my age, so I ended up hanging out with them. And so it was like first day I got in there, they invited me over for breakfast, had breakfast with this lesbian couple. Afterward, they're like, "Do you smoke?" I said, "Absolutely." We, went outside and shared a joint. Started hanging out with them for the next couple of days. Next thing, we're hanging out one day, and one of the girls lived in a really rough area, like up in the hill. Like you see these Latin American, you see these scenes of these big major Latin American cities, and it's like you see the slums, like they're really the most beautiful landscapes in the city, right? These just concrete sprawl up these beautiful Colombian, Brazilian hills, right? You see these pictures, but really the view is incredible, right? Like you're climbing the hill, but those are the poorest houses. Those are houses that are certainly not like regulated builds. They're put together with scrap metal and concrete and scrap wood and shit. Anyway, she lived in these neighborhoods, really rough neighborhoods. Neighborhoods that I couldn't go in without her. And so we went in there to buy some weed from some drug dealers she knew, and she's like, "Just give me $5." I'm thinking, she's gonna give me a little bag of weed. We come back with like a pillowcase full of weed. And so we each had like multiple ounces of weed for $5. And so I'm smoking my share of that weed like the rest of the week there with them. And then I leave. I'm only there for a week. And from there I was going to go to Bogota. Back to Bogota, actually see that same bus station where I was almost quarantined back in the day. And I hop in this bus from Cali. I'm leaving my Airbnb in Cali thinking like, man, is this a smart idea to bring all this weed on this bus? And then of course me, like I'm always going to side with action as opposed to inaction. So I'm like, yeah, who cares? I've only been like really searched one time by the police, and that was the story I told about the drug sniffing dog crossing from Costa Rica to Nicaragua. So I had this bag of coffee in the Airbnb I was staying out. I dumped out the coffee, put the like ounce of weed in the bottom of this coffee bag, and put the coffee grounds back on top of the weed just to at least mask it a little bit. But we were talking about like the corner of the Ziploc bag where the weed was like sticking out of the coffee. This wasn't very well held. And then I had a few other joints that had already been rolled that I stuck like behind my laptop in like the laptop pocket of my backpack. Anyway, we go to this, we pull out of the bus station in Cali at like 11 p.m. midnight. Dude, we didn't get 5 minutes outside the city before we're pulled over by a military checkpoint. And 3 military dudes in our bus. One's clearly the sergeant. One is like kind of the middle dude who's experienced but is the taking orders, and one is the total rookie. And so the total rookie is standing at the door of the bus with a drug-sniffing German Shepherd. The head guy goes to the very back of the bus and starts randomly searching people's bags. And the middle dude is just standing at the front of the bus next to the driver. And I'm in the very front row of the bus. The bus is packed, and I'm the only white person on this bus. And so immediately, dumbass me, I was probably high at the time, I know I have an ounce of fucking weed in my bag, which is probably enough to fucking get to the death penalty in Colombia. I'm kidding, but it's certainly not a good thing. I think, like, okay, I'm going to take this coffee bag and bury it at the bottom of my bag underneath my clothes. So stupid, because like any sort of like rifling through your bag, especially if the only white dude on the bus, I'm clearly like the backpacker guy with long hair and fucking, I was probably wearing like yoga tights and Crocs. I don't fucking know. And,
I'm like rifling through my bag. So immediately, like the head honcho military guy at the back of the bus signals to the dude at the front of the bus, like, hey, check the gringo who's rifling through his bag. And so immediately this dude walks over to me and I'm immediately just like, okay, well, my life is changed forever now. And he opens up my backpack and the first thing he does is pull out my laptop. And like right behind the laptop, there are joints. So he pulls out the laptop and the joints fall down deep in the pocket and he doesn't see them. So I'm like, okay, well, at least he doesn't see those joints, but there's still the ounce of fucking weed at the bottom of my bag in the coffee bag. So he pulls all my clothes out and he sees his coffee bag, open bag of coffee. Like I said, like the corner of the bag of weed can kind of like stick up through the coffee ground. So he opens his coffee bag, smells it, and he starts shifting the coffee back and forth, like shifting the grounds to one side so he can see deeper in the bag, shifting it to the other side so he can peer it deeper and down into the coffee bag. There's no fucking way he didn't see the bag of weed. He sniffs it again, rolls the coffee bag up, puts it back in my bag, puts my clothes back on top, and just says, gracias, buenas noches. Thank you. Have a good night. And that was it. And I'm just sitting there thinking, like, how the fuck am I not in handcuffs? How am I not on the way to jail? I have no idea. There's no way that dude didn't see the bag. The only thing I think is, like, he's like, this is a lot of weed. This is an American. This is going to be a lot of paperwork or, like, you know, just a mess right now. And I just want to get off my night. That's the only explanation I can offer. He let me go. And I'm incredibly appreciative for it. Another crazy story on that trip, I was in Cartagena during like Christmas and New Year's. And, you know, I love exploring these cities, right? I love to just basically find a spot on Google Maps and just walk there. You know, it doesn't matter if it takes me all day to walk there. I love walking through cities or jogging through cities. So I found like the highest point in Cartagena where I knew there's a church on top of this highest point in Cartagena. I just set the route on Google Maps, put in my headphones, and I just ran. And it's wherever the Google Maps takes me, I'm just going to run. And the Google Maps takes me through the worst, poorest, most dilapidated neighborhood I've ever been to in my life. There's a giant staircase that goes up this hill into like the ultimate slum. And of course, fucking dumbass me, I was like, okay, well, you know, hey, stairs. Like that'll add some intensity to my jog. Great. And so I just run up these stairs. I know I'm in the middle of a fucking slum, but like, you know, there's no footing anymore. I'm running on trash. So I have to like slow my jog to a walk. And all of a sudden, next thing I know, I'm surrounded by 3 fucking dudes who pull out knives, put all these knives in my throat. It started with one dude kind of following me, kind of trying to be friendly, but I know this game. Like, hey, you lost, essentially? Like, yeah, no, I'm not lost. I know exactly where I am. Just totally fucking trying to feign that I have any idea what the fuck I'm doing. He's like, hey, why don't you let me show you the way? I'm in the middle of this dude's neighborhood. I'm like, okay, take out my headphones. I've got fucking Bluetooth headphones on, connected with my iPhone. Such a dumbass dude. And I know this. I'm not an inexperienced traveler, right? I know this is dumb. Like, so at this point, I'm like, I fucked up. And so he's like, hey, man, you trying to get up to the top of the mountain? Oh, let me show you the path. Let me show you the quickest path. I'm just like, oh, God, here we go. And I know, and I'm hoping best case scenario, this dude is just being nice and he just wants money. And so I'm like, nah, dude, I kind of know the way. He's like, no, let me show you the way. So I'm like, okay, maybe this dude is going to ask for money at the end. So next thing we know, there's 2 other dudes with us. And they're like very strategically kind of walking one behind me and on either side of me. And we kind of get to the road. It's very clear where I'm going at this point. And dude's like, man, so how like a couple bucks for me showing you the way? And I was like, yeah, dude, no problem. So I pull up my wallet. As soon as I pull up my wallet, they all pull out knives and stick in my face. And the one dude who initially contacted me grabs the money out of my hand, the wallet out of my hand, and runs off. The other 2 dudes are just there. Now it's 2 dudes with knives. So as soon as the dude grabbed the shit out of my hand, I kind of jump back to create distance between me and the other 2 dudes with knives. And I immediately just start like backpedaling, jogging, facing them, keeping them in my distance, but like keeping them in my vision, but creating distance between me and them. And they immediately, not to toot my own horn, but like there's an athletic difference between the 2 of us. And I think they both realize that very quickly. And so they start picking up rocks, and throwing rocks at me and screaming, give me your cell phone, give me your cell phone, give me your cell phone. But at this point, I've already created like 10 feet of distance, and I'm backpedaling now I'm fucking gone. Now, not to mention you're throwing rocks at me. Well, it's not going to like draw me closer. So, I've already made it. You've got knives, so I'm already creating distance from you. Now you're throwing rocks at me, so like that's even more of a reason for me to get the fuck out of here. So I just turned around and ran. And I ran out of there and I lost my wallet. And actually I ran as soon as I got out of that like slum, I was on a main street. 2 cops on a motorcycle immediately like crossed my path. Immediately. Like it's so crazy. And I immediately, I know police in these areas, like it's nothing's going to fucking happen. But I flagged them down. I was like, hey guys, like, I don't know if it's worth your fucking time, but I just walked through this neighborhood. Of course, like, what the fuck are you doing in that neighborhood? I'm like, I know, I'm a fucking idiot. Sorry. But I just got robbed at knife point of these dudes. They took my wallet. I don't even know if this is worth even bringing to your attention, but I figured I would. And they're super nice, man. And they're like, hey man, we'll investigate. In the meantime, like, why don't we give you a ride up to the top of this hill so you can finish your little, tourism journey. I was like, is this for real? Are these guys now going to like harvest my organs? But literally there's 2 dudes on a motorcycle, like 2 dudes, 1 motorcycle. 1 cop gets off the back of the motorcycle and lets me get on the motorcycle while he walks into the slum. The other cop takes me on his motorcycle up to the top of the mountain to the church. I obviously have no money to like pay the fee. It's like a museum to get in there. And he just is like tells the dude at the gate, like, hey, let this gringo in. He just got robbed. And the cops fucking get me into the museum for free. I go see the museum and they're like, hey, spend an hour walking around the museum. We're going to go check out this neighborhood and we'll be back to get you in a little bit. And that's exactly what happened. I couldn't believe it. It's like they gave me a ride up the mountain. I didn't have to walk. They got me into the museum for free. And then they came back an hour later and let me get back on the motorcycle and drove me back to my Airbnb. So while I got robbed at knife point by 3 fucking Colombian dudes in the middle of a slum, it was actually kind of a very pleasant experience. I formed this nice little bond and had this fun little, motorcycle ride through the hills of Cartagena. Anyway. A couple of anecdotes from that vagabond trip. Other than that, like a very introspective, self-reflective vagabonding experience. Panama, Colombia, Peru, and just a tiny bit of Bolivia. And really, when I was coming down from Machu Picchu, in Peru, I wasn't sure. Like I thought I had no end or plan for the journey. It's just like spend a week in this city, move to the next city, a week in this city, move to the next city, and just keep traveling till your money runs out. But I came down from Machu Picchu and I felt a sense of peace, a real sense of peace, unlike a sense of peace I'd experienced in a long time. And I was like, it's time to go home. And that was just out of nowhere. I had no idea if I thought like, I'll just keep this bitch running down to Honduras or down to Argentina, Chile. I didn't know when I was going to stop, but I just felt this sense of peace and I need to come home. And so I got back from Machu Picchu and booked a flight home. I booked like a couple more Airbnbs and a couple more spots throughout Peru and into Bolivia just for a second. And other than that, I knew I was going to go home and that was it. I knew it wasn't over. Like I knew I'll be back on the road, but I don't know. It was just all of a sudden coming out from Machu Picchu. I was like, I'm ready to go home. An overwhelming sense of peace, but also knowing like, okay, I'll be back. Like I'll be back in this part of the world. I'll be back for another trip. But it's time to go home. And that was, March 2019. Yeah, March 2019. And, so I came back home. I actually came back home and immediately started like working on the podcast episodes I'd recorded. But then it dawned on me, you know what? You probably should figure out what your next step in life is professionally, especially like supporting yourself before you dive into doing this podcast project. And I'd always wanted to try, I had personal training and taught yoga kind of on the side when I had taught in the past. I'd always wanted to try to personal train and teach yoga full time. And so I felt the best way to do that was at Equinox, because Equinox is, I never belonged to an Equinox, but I'm in the meathead gym bro-y culture, and I'd always need an Equinox to kind of be the pinnacle of the industry. So I went back to the U.S., visited my sister and nieces in Chicago, visited my other sister and mom in Atlanta, and during that time, got my personal training certification, applied to Equinox, got a job at Equinox, and actually at that time, Lucas, who's been on this podcast before, who is a friend of mine from teaching in Phoenix, who then went to law school at University of Chicago, met his wife in law school at University of Chicago, and then they moved out to LA and they had a baby. And I had mentioned prior in this episode and in prior episodes that Lucas had always been half joking about me being his nanny once they had a kid. At this point, they had a kid. They had a kid in, I remember I was in fucking, actually, now thinking about it now, it's all kind of serendipitous. I was in Cusco, Peru, at I said this awesome Airbnb in Cusco, Peru, but I had to change Airbnbs the night before I was going to take a train to Machu Picchu. And that was the day JoJo was born. That's the day Lucas's daughter was born. That's actually very serendipitous when I think about it. So I can remember being in this tiny little kitchen in Cusco, Peru, boiling sweet potatoes, talking to Lucas about his baby just being born. And the next day I went to Machu Picchu, and I had no plans on leaving, stopping my trip, and coming down from Machu Picchu, I felt a sense of peace, that I wanted to come home, that at least this journey for now is done. And I wasn't thinking consciously at the time, like, oh, I'm going to go be JoJo's nanny. Lucas and I had discussed that prior, but that certainly wasn't my prominent thought. If anything, I thought whenever I do go back home, I'm going to be a personal trainer full time. And I came back home, and that was what I was going to do. I got my personal training certification. I got the job at Equinox. But then me and Lucas are still in contact, and Lucas was like, why don't you come out to LA just to visit and meet the baby? And I did. I remember I was gonna fly up to DC to enter the Equinox I got that I applied to was in DC. DC was the last place I was. I chose DC to move back to DC for multiple reasons. 3 reasons really. One, none of them more important than the other, but really that last year I taught 17-18 school year in DC, like I had just mentioned. I just was a shitty person, and I wanted to kind of redo my DC experience. 2, the girl that I was dating at the time was still in DC. We weren't really in contact, but I knew there was still meat left on that bone of that relationship, and the only way for us to rekindle that was for me to move back to DC, even though there was no plan formally between her and I to get back together. And then 3, it's where I had my friends. It's where my buddy Sam was living. Him and I were going to move in together. Sam is like the most like me of all of my closest friends. He's a super fucking fun dude. And his friend group, a bunch of fucking cool guys and girls, had now become my friends. And so it's like, I have a social group here. This is the last place I lived. I want to redo my DC experience, and let's give this a chance for me to get the band back together with this girl. And they're opening up a brand new Equinox in DC, so I'm going to apply there. And so I got accepted that Equinox, and I was supposed to go fly up there and interview, and I told them, actually, you know what? I got to take this trip out west. I want to come interview with you guys. I'm really interested in this job, but I'm not going to come up there and interview right now. I'm going to go fly out to Phoenix to visit my boy Karashi, who I taught for 3 years in Phoenix. I taught him 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. He was the only 3rd grader I had in my 4th grade class, and if y'all followed me at all on social media or anything, you know, me and this kid, he's now going off to college, and me and this kid have had a very close relationship ever since he's in 3rd grade. And actually, I just moved him into college in Rocky Mountain College in Billings, Montana. He's playing football up there. A whole different story. Anyway, I wanted to go visit him. I wanted to go visit my buddy Mike in Denver, and I wanted to go visit my buddy Lucas and meet his new baby in LA. So I told Equinox, hold on a second, hold off like a month. If you fill the position over the next month, so be it. I need to take this trip out west. So I went to visit Mike, went to visit Karashi in Phoenix, and then went to, actually some other students of mine were graduating high school at the time that I had previously. It's crazy. You know, I taught these kids in 3rd and 4th, 5th grade. Now they're graduating high school and going off to college. Anyway, so went out for their graduations and to see Karashi. And then I came out here to LA and met with Luke. It really was kind of a business trip, right? Like, it was to meet the baby and see Lucas and his wife and just for fun, but it was also very much like to see, okay, could I do, what's this LA situation look like? You know, that's an option. I don't have to be a personal trainer. I could come be Lucas's nanny. So basically, long story short, Lucas and I agreed, and I was out here, hey man, go up to DC, do that thing in DC. Lucas found out during that time that he had much more paternity leave than he initially anticipated, and so there was less of a rush. We basically had 6 months before they needed a nanny. And so we both agreed, go out to DC for several months, see if you like the Equinox gig, if you like being back in DC, if you can get the band back together with this chick. If not, come out to LA. And that's exactly what happened. I went to DC. The whole Equinox thing was kind of a mess. The gym was supposed to open up in August and didn't open until October. So that put me I had just enough money financially to like live in DC after vagabonding for fucking not working for a year and vagabonding. I had just enough money to like pay rent in DC and pushed it to the absolute fucking brink with the 2-month delay of the gym. You know, we're paying $1,500 a month in rent. And I'll make sure I'm getting all this on tape still. We're still recording? Yes. Sorry, we'll wrap this up here in just a second. So I love the job was fine. Like, I don't like selling myself to clients. But the people I worked with was amazing. It was the best colleague group I ever had. A bunch of people that are into fitness. And then we just had the most diverse, racially diverse, all walks of life diverse, just fun group of fucking personal trainers working at Equinox. That's the one thing I really miss from leaving DC. But anyway, I lived in DC for 6 months. And I just wasn't happy there. The girl was not interested in getting the band back together at that point, although there's still meat left on that bone. Whole fucking crazy thing. Me and this girl are still involved in each other's lives, which makes me think there's something there. I don't know. Anyway, that remains to be seen. That girl, but there's something still going on with her. Anyway, it wasn't going to happen with me and her in DC, at least not then. I love living with Sam, but I did kind of feel like I love living with Sam and being with his friends, but I did kind of feel like I was like living his social life. Like he was my best friend, he's my boy, but all of my kind of friend group were his friends, and I love them to death. Don't get me wrong, but just kind of felt like it wasn't my life a little bit. So I decided to leave DC, and at that time, Lucas needed a nanny. I didn't want to be in DC anymore. Like I said, I love my colleagues, but I didn't really love the gig. Lucas made it certainly worth my while out here financially. I was going to make more money out here than I was personal training, and I've always wanted to live. I've repeated myself this 1,000 times. But I've always wanted to live in LA, and then the biggest thing was I want to be a dad, and this was the perfect way for me to like get some hands-on dad experience. And the first couple months out here were amazing. And when I came out here to visit before I took the Equinox job, I live in this little like shack, basically this guest house in Lucas's backyard. When I came out here just to visit, the first time I stepped into the shack where I'm recording this episode now, I got an utter sense of peace. The same sense of peace I got coming down from Machu Picchu. The feeling that I am where I'm supposed to be. And it was very hard, even just visiting Lucas at that time in May of 2019, to not just say, all right, dude, let's fucking do this now. I knew I needed to go back to DC. I knew in a large part, I didn't want to go back to DC. There's a lot of pain associated with going back to DC. But it's like, this is such a fucking meathead analogy, but it's like soft tissue manipulation, foam rolling. What's called SMR, self-myofascial release, right? You have these painful points in these muscle adhesions in your soft tissue, in your muscles and tendons. They're muscle knots, for lack of a better description. And the best way to relieve them is to place pressure on them, to break up that scar tissue, break up the adhesion. It's really painful to do so. That's what foam rolling is, right? You're rolling on all these muscle adhesions and scar tissue, all that's really tight and knotted up, and it's painful to place pressure on it, but the only way to relieve it and to loosen it up and to provide relief and get energy flowing properly and blood flowing properly is to go through the painful experience of breaking that muscle tissue down. And that's the same thing I knew with DC. I knew going back there was going to be painful. I don't love DC, like I don't love the culture of DC, but I knew I needed to go back there and do it over and kind of like confront the shitty person I had been in the year prior. I knew it was going to be painful to live in the same city as this girl when there's no certainty whatsoever that we were even going to see each other. And we never, well, that's a whole different story, but we never really did. And I knew like doing this job where I had to sell myself and there's no financial security being a personal trainer. Like it's all about building your own little business. I knew that was going to be difficult. All things I wasn't particularly interested in, but I knew were necessary that I needed to confront. And I did. And I'm glad I did. But as soon as I moved out to LA, it was like the first time. When I was in DC, the whole time I felt like I was swimming against the stream of life. And as soon as I came out to LA, it was like, oh my God, I'm in the current of life. I'm flowing with the current of life. And even during quarantine, I still feel like I'm flowing during the current of life. And like I said, man, for the past 7 months, I've essentially been in nothing but utter social isolation. And who knows when this is going to end. But even still, this is the longest period of sustained happiness and psychological stability I've ever experienced in my life, in my adult life. And back to like the psychiatry, specific psychological nature of this all. Rewind real quick back to Phoenix during the time where I had the car accident and the kid got shot and I put the razor blade to my wrist. I was off the Prozac altogether. I went back to the psychiatrist. He put me on double the dosage of Prozac that I was supposed to be on.
and on Adderall, which is a horrible idea because you shouldn't be on that much Prozac. It presents a whole nother set of issues. All of a sudden you become from a depressive to like a manic person. You think you're invincible and you make all kinds of crazy decisions. And then you combine that with Adderall and amphetamine. Just real bad cocktail of medicine. Anyway, over the past couple years, I've been reducing from 20 milligrams was my effective, helpful dose all throughout college and my first couple years teaching at Phoenix. I tried to get off that 20 milligrams, had trouble getting off of it, went back on the 20 milligrams, went off the 20 milligrams again in 2015. Shit hit the fan. Then I went back to this other psychiatrist in Phoenix when I was back teaching there for a year. He puts me on 40 plus Adderall. That presented a whole nother set of issues. As I just said, you go from being depressive to being this manic crazy person where you think you're kind of invincible, which is a whole nother, it's a more fun psychological illness, but it's a whole nother set of psychological illness symptoms to deal with. So basically since 2018 until now, I've been steadily decreasing my Prozac dosage from 40 milligrams down to nothing. And right now I'm at 7.5 milligrams, which I don't think any psychiatrist would ever put you on anything less than like 15 or 10. So basically I'm on like nothing of Prozac and I still feel amazing. Not amazing. Amazing is strong. I still feel fine, even with quarantine. So I'm going to continue the steady reduction of this Prozac while in quarantine. I'm dubious, and it's going to be a precarious exercise, but I'm determined to do so and find a way to live a healthy psychological life off this Prozac, and I'll be happy to document my progress with that on this podcast. But yeah, that kind of catches us up to where we are now. I think we're over 3.5 hours into this thing at this point. Thank you for sticking around and hearing my life story. If you're still with me, I'm trying to think of a way to close it out. I'm in quarantine. I don't know what the future of this podcast is. Sue and Lucas, the people I live with, are taking all of this very seriously. And so they're not cool with me having a social life, essentially. And that's no shade or criticism of them. I totally understand that. I chose to be here. I continue to choose to be here. And so, and I'm living, taking care of them. And obviously my actions affect them, as far as COVID contamination. So, I'll be respectful of their quarantine viewpoint. But over the last month or two, I've started to feel my psychological state slip a little bit. I started to feel depressive symptoms slipping back in. And if there is no change to quarantine, no change to the COVID environment that I'm living in, if there is no progress made in that regard by the end of the year, then probably I'm going to have to move on. Being around human beings is an essential part of all of our happiness. And in me in particular, that's like the crux of my existence. Like I said at the beginning of all this, I've arranged my life in a way where I'm not pursuing romantically. I'm not interested in marriage or building a family. I don't think I'll ever be interested in marriage. Maybe that'll change. I really don't think so. But I would like to build a family at some point, in whatever way, however that looks. But I'm not interested in that. Long story short, I'm not interested in living conventional adult lifestyle at all. I don't want to collect possessions. I don't want to collect long-term romantic relationships. I want to be free of any major responsibility. And I want to just have liquid cash and be able to travel new places, meet new people, have unique and novel experiences, make questionable decisions. That's the entire way my life is designed. That's what I want to do with my time at this point in my life. And in quarantine, you can't do any of that. There is no traveling. There is no hanging out with strangers. There are no unique and novel experiences. It's like all of this. I've arranged my life in a certain way to pursue all of those things. And quarantine life is the exact opposite of that. And, I don't know how much longer I can do this. I'm not unhappy. I'm not depressed. I'm not like on the verge of psychological catastrophe, but I don't want to regret this at all. This has been an amazing, beautiful experience being JoJo's nanny out here. One of the most magical and happiest times of my life. I can feel it personally, my personal psychological state starting to slip, and I don't want to look back on this time with regret. Certainly, I don't want to slip into deeper psychological turmoil. And then more than that, I don't want to, maybe that's number one. But in addition to that, I don't want to look back on this time as missed opportunity. Like I stayed in quarantine too long where I could have been doing X, Y, and Z instead. But
But I also need to have perspective, like, you know, there's a global pandemic going on, and I'm not saying like, oh, woe is me. And I really don't want it to come off like that at all. I really don't think like, oh, woe is me. You know, I'm choosing to be here. I'm perfectly happy here for the time being. But at some point it's like, I don't ever want to stay in one place. And I feel very locked in one place right now. So I hope at some point something changes and I can stay here. I want to, Los Angeles is, when it's, you know, Los Angeles is humming as LA is supposed to be at normal. Like, there's plenty to do and people to meet. And, you know, I would be, if Los Angeles gets back to normal sometime soon, I'd be fine staying out here working as JoJo's nanny until she's in kindergarten, which, like I said, is 4 years from now. But if quarantine stays like it is, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to stay here or not. And then the podcast is a significant part of that too. It's like I wanted the podcast to be me starting off interviewing in person the people I know best, and then have the podcast evolve into me meeting new people and forming new relationships, and those being the guests. I want the future guests of this podcast to be people I've never met, who I don't have relationships with now. But when you're living in quarantine, you're not forming these relationships. You're not meeting any of these people. And I don't want the podcast to be Zoom-based interviews with, I do want to interview more friends and family. I do want to get people on the podcast who are past relationships. I don't want all of the future episodes to be people like I've just met. I do, there's a bunch of friends I have and family members I have who either A, didn't want to be on the podcast, or I just haven't had the chance to interview them because I wanted to do all of them in person. But I don't know. This is this week's episode, and I don't know what next week's episode is going to be. I'm hoping there is a next week's episode. Like I said, I'm going to make a concerted effort to keep putting up episodes every month. And then I can tell you this, eventually the podcast will be me back on the road, crossing international borders, living out of a backpack. That may be 4 years from now. But whenever it is I leave LA, I'm hitting the road again, is what I would like to do. I want to hit the road again. I want to travel the world. I want to travel the entire world, honestly. I think ideally this podcast turns into, me traveling the world. And every week I, post a podcast, either like recounting my experiences of the past week in whatever country I'm in, or sitting down with whatever person I've met in whatever country I'm in. I want to, be in Bolivia and do, hey, this is my week in Bolivia. And then next week go down to fucking Paraguay and be like, hey, this is my week in Paraguay. And these, that's what I like the podcast to ultimately be, but that may be years and years from now. So we'll see. Thank you for listening to me ramble about my life. But like I said, I want this podcast to be an accurate reflection of my current life experiences and reflections of my life experience. And right now I am totally isolated and totally by myself. So it feels very appropriate to have a podcast where I'm just rambling, totally isolated and totally by myself. So this is this week's episode, and we will see what happens next week. Thank you very much for listening. I'm sure I left out some crazy stories and shit, and we'll see if maybe I'll recount some of those in the future. But thank you for listening. I love you all, whoever you are listening to this, and I will talk to you soon. Besos.